Hello and good evening. So welcome to the Sunset Stream. We are going to be discussing pretty much Roe v. Wade. This is the Sunset Stream for June 28th, 2022. So once more, the topic broadly is going to be the recent decision on Roe v. Wade to repeal Roe v. Wade, the landmark abortion legislation. But I think people already know my opinion on this. I think what we'll talk about is really the reaction and what I think the dynamic is playing out and what I think are traps for the right wing. Obviously, this is the objective of tearing down Roe v. Wade has been one of these philosopher's stones for the right wing movement. It was seen as unassailable because it was Supreme Court precedent in the United States since, 1972? And then again, it was reaffirmed in a much more sweeping Supreme Court decision called Casey versus Planned Parenthood. And for the longest time, the destruction of Roe v. Wade, and moreover, I guess I should say a broader attack on what's called substantive due process, which I can explain if people want me to. This was the ultimate objective seems a little bit grandiose. It was broadly the MO of the legal right wing to take this down for the longest time. And now, through a variety of circumstances, through the fact that a number of Supreme Court justices either died or retired under Trump's watch, now all of a sudden, it's gone. The precedent has been removed, and the power of making abortion rights or abortion laws, depending on how you see it, has been returned to the states. Now, immediately, I guess what was so predictable is the left lost their shit. As you can see from the thumbnail on this video, if you were on Twitter or on social media or watch the news at all, you see kind of these parades of people completely having emotional breakdowns because of this decision. And I don't know if the right really knows what to do with the victory. This is my prediction when it came down to Roe v. Wade, is that ultimately it accomplishes less than what the most pro-lifers hoped it would accomplish, or naively hoped it would accomplish. And because the thing had become such a boogeyman, I don't think anyone really thought about what the dynamics would be post-Roe. I don't think that they're bad for the right wing. In fact, I think they're quite good. And I'll get into that a little bit later. But the right doesn't really, you know how there's this saying, I think it comes from Yarvin's original Unqualified Reservations blog. They say that the first thing that the right wing does when it gets a victory is it flexes. And the first thing the left wing does when it gets a victory is it tries to get more victories. The right wing has a victory, and really, other than the laws that immediately triggered across a variety of red states on the interior of the United States to immediately legalize abortion, the right really didn't know what to do. It was almost like the left had developed a script going into this with a lot more. They had all the rules figured out. It didn't hurt that this decision was essentially leaked for almost a month before we actually learned about it. But you get this kind of weird confusion going on about what's the right wing's reaction supposed to be. And of course, this predictable thing where the left freaks out that abortion's now illegal. It's not illegal. It's basically returned to the states, and in the majority of states, and in the majority of jurisdictions where there are large populations that get abortions, abortion will still be legal. And ultimately, when everything is said and done, with all the people going across state lines and with all the statutes made for exceptions, probably the total number of abortions this will prevent will be fairly small, tragically speaking. But that doesn't matter because the right's not prepared for this dynamic. The left has its slogans. They repeat those slogans. They bleat them into the microphone. And what does the right do? The right goes on Twitter and goes, I guess no one understands what federalism is. I guess no one understands how this actually works. I bet none of these people could explain substantive due process. And there's this whole sort of scoffing movement that the normie right likes to make. And this is part of a broader flex that, it's so predictable, right? It's so predictable that this is the way the right wing is going to handle a victory. It's not going to actually plan for what it wants to do or what it wants the conversation to be going forward, because it can't control what the conversation is going to be going forward. So instead, it scoffs at obvious misinterpretations of fact and law. It makes cases about, what if the shoe had been on the other foot? These crazy activists don't even know they're talking about, blah 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 blah. But what's not coming out of this from the right wing is any kind of vision about what a post-Roe dynamic is going to be. Case in point, people might not be aware of this. The pro-life movement's goals, they've only just begun at this stage. Getting rid of Roe v. Wade was the first step, not the last one. And moreover, if you look at how the pro-life movement has organized itself, I'm thinking here of the March for Life, it's totally organized itself around this idea that Roe would eternally be in place. The big rally that they have in D.C. every year, the March for Life, takes place on the anniversary of the Roe decision. And I hope they keep it there. And it'll just be the March for Life generally. But you see how there's sort of a narrative problem that emerges from this, and that the right's not really prepared to deal with it. I don't think this is a huge problem. Conversely, I've noticed a lot of people have contacted me, and they'll say things like this. They'll say, Dave, I think that the right wing is really going to take an L if they abolish Roe v. Wade, because the leftist backlash is going to be so hard, and we haven't really made any gains culturally, so we can't discourage anyone from getting abortions who wants them, and we can't persuade the ruling class that abortion is wrong, and we can't get the media to portray abortion as something that is demonic. So all we're doing is just seizing power that we can't hold. And yes and no. I mean, you can't do all of those things. You can't take the substantive steps that you would need to move this country from a culture that sees abortion as a form of birth control to a culture that actually sees family planning as the principal subject of all policy we make around reproductive rights or reproductive duties, as I like to think of it. And so the problem is that with this sort of black pill thing, where you see this as sort of a prefiguration of a greater right-wing defeat, is although I think in many ways the victories that this gives us, well, somewhat real or a little bit illusory. So too is this idea that the left is going to have this giant backlash against right-wingers. No, I mean the problem is they basically pushed all of the punish right-winger buttons that they could possibly push without crossing serious lines, and they're sort of running out of avenues that they can reasonably go down without destabilizing their own power structure. So there really isn't anything that they can do in a material sense, I believe, that they either haven't done already or that they weren't already planning to do for other reasons having to do with Donald Trump and their total fear of a populist revolution sweeping them out of power and clearing out the bureaucracies that they rely on. So I don't think that is that really is the danger, so to speak. Again, they've pushed all the buttons they have to punish the right wing. The one thing is, and I think there is sort of a danger, and I'll go into this now, and the left cannot materially try to attack the right for reasons I've mentioned. I mean, it can, but they were going to do those things already, right? They can sort of lean into the cultural humiliation. There's a clip going around that was just, I hate to say it, but I was completely triggered with Rachel Levine, this utter, I hate to use the word mutant, but the person strikes me as a complete mutant in their appearance. And not only have they been colored, have they been given military decorations, despite the fact that I don't think they've ever served in the military, they're declared an admiral. Now, this horrible, this horribly grotesque individual is laying out policy about how the Biden administration wants to declare early life gender affirmation therapy as a fundamental right for children. Gender affirmation is life care. Didn't you know that? And all options are on the table for young children. All options are on the table. Anything we can do to affirm them in their new gender, that will be something that we have to do for the health of this country. And of course, you're hearing this from something that looks just like something that crawled out of a gene stealer cult from Warhammer 40K. It creates this sense in you, and you feel this feeling kind of well up in you that's just absolute rage. And I probably sent a few spicy tweets that I probably shouldn't have sent, or Telegram posts. I don't know. I can't keep track of it. Whatever I do, where I just put little messages into the phone and it comes out both on Twitter and Telegram, I don't really pay attention to it as much as I once did. But that's the point. The point with all of this is to encourage the right to flex and rage, because that's where the right really makes mistakes. When the right really loses its power when it flexes, because it shores up their narrative. It shores up their narrative of right-wingers who are coming to get you, of an energized populist base. The narrative of Supreme Court justices making a decision that the left doesn't like isn't quite as juicy. What they really want to imagine, in order for their narrative to work, for the left at least, what they need to imagine that there's an army of trad dads coming to put all the women back into The Handmaid's Tale. And I think that the fact that all of these older millennial women, on the verge of 40, are just obsessed with this show about submissive women is a little bit telling, and not for very flattering reasons. But that's the narrative. What they want to see is a huge populist surge. What they don't want to tell the story of is how the Supreme Court is corrupt, or how the Supreme Court needs to go away, or how we can't trust government officials, or how we need to completely abolish the federal control the Supreme Court has over reproductive rights. First of all, there's a lot of reasons why the narrative of Supreme Court bad doesn't play well for the left. First of all, it's hard for even the left to cover this up right now, but Supreme Court bad is basically the right-wing position, and has been the right-wing position since the Warren Court. So their ability to reclaim that narrative is really, really limited based on what we have right now. Furthermore, it fundamentally undermines their more general narrative that all government processes that go through an oligarchic bureaucracy are somehow deemed scientific, and to question them is to question the legitimacy of experts themselves. And lastly, it fundamentally goes against their broader political goals of centralizing power at the top level. It doesn't work narratively. Even to have someone explain the position, Keith Olbermann tweeted out about how we needed to destroy the Supreme Court. Okay, Keith. So Keith Olbermann, was he from MSNBC? I don't know where he is currently. But he's kind of this dinosaur from the Bush administration. He's this utter spurg that used to do a commentary on sports ball, and now he was briefly the blowhard for MSNBC before he did his own thing. But anyone who tweets that position, you just have to sort of ask these basic questions. Okay, so we burn down the Supreme Court, Keith, and then what happens? Like, where does the authority to establish abortion laws go? Other than where the Supreme Court just left it with a decision you thought was so bad, we're going to burn down the Supreme Court to avoid them making this historic infringement upon the sublime legitimacy of our constitutional democracy. And this also does not play well, encouraging these kind of ostentatious and revolutionary actions when at the same time they're trying to play on primetime their January 6th narrative. So the whole thing just doesn't work. And the only thing that can save their narrative is angry right-wingers who are flexing on the left. My advice for right-wingers in this whole process is just take the victory in as much silence as you can possibly manage. This is just something that happened. The Supreme Court decided in 1972 that abortion needed to be a right. It decided in 1991 that abortion needed to be a right. I think that's when Casey was. And now, for whatever reason, the gods have decided, the gods that control the living Constitution have decided that abortion is no longer a right, needs to be returned to the states to have democratic decisions made on it. The Lord giveth, the Lord taketh away, as they say. This is something that happened. I consider it fortunate. I consider it to be a good thing. I consider it to be progress towards having a culture that does not let people murder children in order to get adults out of their own irresponsible decisions when it comes to their reproductive responsibilities. But that's all there is to really say about it. It's just something good that happened. It was just something... The wind blew in one direction. One justice had a particularly divine revelation about our approach to substantive due process, and it just happened. And if the left wants to have a conversation about how they feel it was wrong, or if they want to have a conversation about how we should vote on it, we can have that conversation. We can have that calm conversation in the mode of democratic discourse, but I'm not emotionally invested in it. I'm not flexing on anybody. I'm not organizing the Handmaid's Tale populist uprising. And then just watch and see what the left's reaction is. The real problem with the left's reaction to Roe v. Wade, and the way that it will actually, I think, accomplish some amount of change in the subsequent decades, was that it's not going to really prevent that many abortions, and it's not going to lead to some kind of democratic wave that will legalize abortion across most of the country. Heck, I would be surprised even if people can keep the trigger laws that immediately banned abortion in a lot of red states. I would be surprised if they could keep those in full force across 2, 3, or 4 more plebiscites that are inevitably going to come to attack those laws. What the left is going to be immediately looking for is some narrative of a woman who died on the operating table because she couldn't get an abortion. And that's how they did it in Ireland, and that's how they're probably going to attack the laws right now. But that's not the real problem for the left right now. The real problem for the left right now is that in some sense it's a more abstract victory, because their abstract narrative is having significant problems. This is not an unbroken string of progressive victories. This is a loss. And it more than the loss being a policy setback or some opportunity for more activism, a leftist loss is always an opportunity for more political activism, which always accrues more funding for the left. But this time you might notice it's feeling a little bit different. And the reason why it's feeling a little bit different is that people are getting tired. People are feeling like at some point they want to rest on some idea of normalcy, of some idea that the progressive victories that they won in the past will forever be carried forward into the future. That which the house of the left has conquered, as Muslims say, will eternally be in the house of the left. This shatters that narrative and now puts the progressive idea of an unbroken string of victories with some minor setbacks. It puts this narrative into a bit of crisis, because although the left will certainly be able to inspire an enormous amount of activism and an enormous amount of funding on the back of the Supreme Court ruling that they lost, they will not immediately be able to restore this decision in any short term. And so for the foreseeable future, the narrative will be this was something that we once had and that we no longer have, and that there's no easy way to see how this is ever going to change in the next 10 years or so. That narrative is a hard narrative for the left to swallow, because it's really more of a generational thing. It's really more of a thing about how millennials are experiencing politics. And I'm thinking of my generation in particular. Again, my generation is in their late 30s. We're not getting any younger. The women, they can see 40, and they can see 40 and it does not look good. And they're looking for something to give their life meaning. They're looking for community. They're looking for some kind of stable world that's going to exist after their foray into politics. They're designed to sort of supplant religion. And all they're seeing around them is just a mix of chaos and instability. And I don't know, I think the calmer and slower everyone moves in their own dialectics and their own conversations about these topics, the more the fundamental strengths of the right wing can come to the fore. The fundamental weakness of the left in the post-sexual revolution is that it has no model for successful and healthy human relations that are all stable and that are all equitable in between genders. The best it can do is to sort of ban everything and then to hope to imply that everything can be an exception. So, all sex that is not affirmatively consented to, with every step of the escalation, is rape. That was maybe the younger viewers don't remember that one, but that's a gem from about 2016 to 2017. That every escalation of the sexual act had to have an explicit yes attached to it, even if there was a pre-existing relationship, even if there was a marital relationship, which means that, for a while, the left was telling us that all sex that most of us have ever had, which exists primarily on implicit consent, usually hopefully under the guise of a relationship, especially for us Christians, that necessarily so, unless we're flirting with some sin. This is, but the left had, as far away from us as it seems that the old standards were, when it came to the Christian worldview, the leftist ones were flatly contradictory and flatly in contradiction to what they were actually doing. But this was the only way that they could explicitly state their own idea about what a post-sexual revolution lifestyle was supposed to look like. They couldn't embody it in any other way. And the only way they have to do it now is to kind of avoid the issue. In 2016, most millennials were in their late 20s and early 30s. I believe there were some in their early 20s, obviously. There's some in their mid 30s, like Sargon. But that's really where we were back then. At this stage, the problem is that we're no longer talking about sex. We're talking about family formation. And the women who are upset about something like Roe v. Wade, a lot of them aren't really thinking about a guy who knocked them up. In college, they're thinking about why a husband hasn't materialized. And I'm not so sure that makes the abortion activism feel as rewarding to them. It doesn't feel like they're getting back at somebody who actually unjustly snubbed them. I mean, perhaps if they think that abortion itself is some kind of revenge against the dating market for not delivering reliable men to them, and in some sense, they have a right to be upset about that. But the left doesn't have any answers. The leftist has silence. The leftist has these weird parades it does, and we keep on spinning our wheels across the same political dynamic that doesn't seem to be working for anybody. It's this relief of people's lives that really is the dynamic that is going to help us eventually, and that will eventually bail out the pro-life movement. Everyone pointed to the fact that people make this whole thing of physiognomy, the idea that certain traits of the mind and certain traits of the personality can be carried over into physical expressions that we see on our faces and on our body types. This is sort of the Edward Dutton idea of the spiteful mutant. The spiteful mutant being a genetic specimen that cannot compete ordinarily in healthy human society and therefore enters politics to try to attack the healthy subjects and try to gain clout that way. And I think this is oftentimes exaggerated by the right wing. But one of the things that people point out, obviously, is that the pro-life women just look like a whole lineup of incredibly marriageable prospects for any kind of aspiring young man who has a reasonable professional career ahead of him and who's more or less ambitious to start a family. Whereas the pro-choice marches, they're a complete disaster area, and it's hard to really express the emotion that you get looking at that is not some kind of ascendant political activism class, but people who are just kind of experiencing despair at the middle point of their lives and don't really understand how they're going to express that in any other way than being angry at a decision that a judge made, even though they already agreed to the fact that these 9 unelected officials had the right to decide on this topic by their own previous activism. So I think I said a little earlier, this is, people comment a lot about this idea of physiognomy in women, but really, when we get down to it, these women look worse, less because they're of some kind of like poorer stock. Maybe there's a correlation there, but it's probably very minor. These women look worse because they're physically depressed and they've been lied to by men, and life hasn't given them what they've wanted, and this has created a certain amount of bitterness and a certain amount of despondency and hopelessness, and people necessarily look a lot less put together when that's the case. And I mean, I feel really, and they're in some sense they're victims, right? I think maybe I'm being unfair to men, but when I think of physiognomy, when I think of the sort of the Edward Dutton idea that poor genetic specimens are attracted to progressivism, I consider that really more of a male phenomenon. Feminism attracts women because it tells them what it wants to hear. Feminism attracts men because it's an opportunity for them to gain status that they couldn't ordinarily get otherwise. And especially in sort of the post-woke politics, the men who typically are attracted to progressivism usually have either some sexual proclivity that would actually make them, some kind of intersectional protected class by their sexual orientation, or they really have some other kind of property about their personalities or their formation that then would make them otherwise a very unattractive prospect to most women. And when you get these people together and they're protesting, and the protest cannot be spun into a narrative of heroism, that's very, very difficult. It's very, very difficult. I mean, it was easy to see. There's two modes that the left always wants to be in. They want to be in the heroic underdog position, or they want to be in the overdog, we won and we're going to cash in at the expense of our political enemies. And this current reset of Roe v. Wade, given the position that they are already in, it's very, very hard to swing. It's very, very hard for them to swing the narrative that there's some kind of revolutionaries waiting to burn the court down, and it's very, very difficult for them to portray this as some kind of penultimate note to an ultimate left-wing victory. And I think that this is going to make the narrative for them very difficult, provided that the right wing can keep their cool, provided that the narrative of the right wing going forward is always going to be to take a step back and to look at the bigger picture. I don't know if this really even happens anymore. To the extent to which people talk to other people on the left or the right is largely it's largely a function. I think it's largely an artifact of the past. I used to talk to leftists all the time, and now very few of them do. They're either debate bros on Twitch, or they're totally uninterested in any kind of dialogue. And But to the extent that you were ever confronted with leftists' rage over this abortion decision, the conversation just has to be, okay, we probably disagree on this, but let's take a step back and discuss what a healthy sexual culture would look like. Because it seems like we have more than just the problem of unwanted pregnancies. We have the problem of people never getting married. We have the problem of young people never having relationships, period. Of record, historically low family formation rates in the West. This certainly has to be taken in as a collective issue, and we can't just go after these things one after the other. And so this is that's how I would really choose to approach this. Again, I've increasingly become convinced that the way the right reacts to the present moment is just to let these processes play out a little bit. Obviously, the avenues that we would need to take immediate political action aren't open to us. And what we have going forward is this necessity to kind of bear witness to what's going on around us and to establish ourselves in relation to it realistically. It's not to lose our cool. And I think if we can affect that dynamic, the dynamic of the left itself is going to kind of fall through. And that will be the real victory that we can take from the Roe decision. Certainly there'll be some children who are saved from abortion. But the bigger one is, I think, the disintegration of the leftist narrative about some kind of stable post-sexual revolution reality when it comes to the relationships between men and women sexually and in the context of forming families. So, okay, guys, shorter spiel this time. I'm going to go on to Super Chats and just talking with the chat. Again, I always do the Super Chats first, but if you want to contact me, always the feedback when I go to Entropy. If you want to contact me, otherwise, you can @reply me, and if I'm done with the Super Chats, I'll go over to that. Okay. Okay. I can't remember if it starts from the bottom or the top. I think it starts from the bottom. Okay, so Society Man for $5. Oh, by the way, before we start here, so I have this. I finally decided that I would actually not read online anymore and actually my Psalter out, so I don't have to scroll across advertisements to get a free psalm at the end of the live stream for the poetry or the scriptures reading. Oh, and by the way, also I should apologize for the haggard look. This last week has been a little bit rough. Let's say that. This is everyone seems to be sick. This has been going on for 2 weeks now, and you're either sick yourself or you're taking care of somebody who's sick. This is parents of young children will know this, but it just seems like the toddler years are just horrible for bringing back diseases. I think the fact that this was right after lockdown really gave this year for sicknesses a running start. But I posted up the psalm that I'm going to read, or at least the first stanza of it, or the first verse. I think, as they say, stanza is not applied to scripture. But the stanza reads, "I will sing forever your love, O Lord. Through all ages my mouth will proclaim your truth. Of this I am sure, that your love lasts forever, that your truth is firmly established as heaven." Okay, well, thank you very much. I'll read the full one at the end. Anyone want to tell me what psalm that is from the first verse? Society Man says for $5, the overturning of Roe v. Wade is the death knell of the David Crunch right. Yeah, I think this is another thing too, is that the idea that there is going to be an opposition to Donald Trumpism has pretty much killed the normie conservative movement. I'm not so sure how much that ultimately means, because I think they're really on their way out anyway. But nobody... The whole idea of the NormieCon movement was that by sort of playing the game and holding people to high standards, they were going to procure victory, I guess, from winning over Democrats, from winning over moderates, from being highly principled when it came to our belief in the Constitution. Well, ultimately what happened was a complete lout, a complete what do they call them? I would say a gauche businessman just stumbled backwards into the Oval Office, and then due to pure luck, he got a few Supreme Court seats open to him, and he nominated the justices, and then he scored the victory. This idea that and that accomplished more than 30 years of sort of George Bush, Mitt Romney belly aching about proceduralism and about taking a moderate stance and about compassionate conservatism. I'm David French. I honestly don't know who the market is for these people anymore. There's another blogger called Mark Shea, and he's also of this ilk where he was a Catholic blogger that I used to read fairly religiously. And he kind of went hard into this anti-Trumpism. And I guess there's just this set of boomers and this set of really, I think, are sort of younger or older Generation Xers. And they're still sort of circling this sort of hysteria of anti-Trumpism. And I don't know what to say. I mean, Trump has been president for more than a year at this stage, and this is, this narrative. I don't know. I have a hard time imagining the kind of person who still finds this attractive and cathartic and like it's moving some kind of conversation forward. I don't know who these people are talking to. Right now, the Trumpists have been able to get the most substantial political victory for the right that the right has ever had, basically since 1980, for almost 50 years. And the people who oppose them really have nothing to say in light of that. But ultimately, I think that the real question is, what is Trumpism going to look like? Here's the deal, right? What is going to happen in the next set of elections and at the end of the January 6th committee? What's going to come out of that? Are they going to try to block Trump from running? Are they going to try to block Trump-type people from running? Are they going to lose big in November? What's the Democratic Party's tact going to be? Because they control all the institutional levers. So the election goes on basically inside the frame of whatever power they decide to put on the table, as much as they possibly can. The question of who's going to win or who's going to go up against the Democrats in the elections, both this year and in 2024, is going to be a question about how embarrassed the Democrats are to not try to pull more shenanigans. And that's an open question, that they might actually try to block Trump from running, to kind of put some kind of legislative injunction against Trump himself, which I think would be a really stupid move on their part, because the obvious solution, if they ever tried to legally ban a person from winning the presidency, is for everyone to vote for Trump, and then manufacture in that moment a constitutional crisis where it's literally illegal for the person with a popular vote to obtain the office he's been elected to. I would vote in that election, and I don't usually vote in elections, but if they took hard, explicit procedural measures to try to block Trump and Trump supporters from running in 2024 because they're just that paranoid about a populist upset against the institutions they need to rule, that really opens them to a lot of vulnerabilities that maybe they're aware of, maybe they're not. I'm certainly aware of those vulnerabilities, and that's when a lot of the narrative can be unraveled very quickly. But we'll see what ultimately comes of this. We knew, I think it's a good tweet, super chat, a good message, society, man. But I don't think that the normie cons were on their way out anyway, right? We knew that, right? Ori Samsonov for $5. Yes, thank you, Ori. I got an email from you. I wanted to say I really appreciated the sentiment, even though I might not be able to oblige. But thank you for the kind sentiments nonetheless. For $15, wow, thank you very much. I'm fasting. Please have my lunch money. Well, that's great. Is it a holy day of obligation? I'm finally getting around to my summertime weight loss, and I usually start more when Lent ends, but we had a move ahead of us, so I never got around to it. So I've done this intermittent fasting thing where I'm going to cut out desserts and then just not eat outside of 2 meals a day and see where that leads me. The first time I did some of this, I lost about like 10 pounds. I mean, this was back in, it's like last year or something like that. But, the problem with me is that, there are two things that I think really make men gain weight. Having a kid and finishing a PhD dissertation. And I had both of those things occur in quick succession, and so I put on a lot of weight. And, people, my wife makes fun of our wedding photos because I look really bloated because it was right before I defended and was not living a healthy lifestyle, and it was kind of a moment in time, right? But and the photographer did not. He did not do a good job at obscuring my extra pounds. But slowly, hopefully, I'm losing my PhD weight, and hopefully this fasting stuff will. Everyone's raving about intermittent fasting, so it's worth a try. Usually, I find if I stick to diets, I do fairly well. So, okay, perfect. Aristocratic Owl for $5. Got water as opposed to tea here. Since I am, I guess tea is allowed on the fast, but I don't want to have anything like sugar because that just gets you in the mood to snack. And after you finish speaking, you really want to eat something. Aristocratic Owl for $15 USA, or some quantity of money. Yes. I think that's incorrect, but let's go on anyway. Anyone who keeps up to date with the legal field in the academy would understand most of the academy has given up on substantive due process and has pivoted to a new argument on abortion, which they argue it from a Ninth Amendment point of view. Ninth Amendment? Am I remembering the Ninth Amendment properly? Hold on, guys. I want to look this up. Okay. So here's this is pretty easy. That's the enumeration in the Constitution that the enumeration of the Constitution of certain rights shall not be used to deny or disparage other rights that are retained by the people. Okay, the 10th Amendment is obviously the one where if it's not an enumerated power of the federal government, it goes to the states. And the 9th Amendment is that just because a rights appear in the Constitution does not mean that the Constitution prohibits those rights from being exercised by the people. The problem is that this Ninth Amendment approach is just kind of all of these attempts to manufacture new progressive rights out of constitutional interpretation are just transparently ridiculous. The idea that the Ninth Amendment could be used to literally manufacture an unlimited commission for the Supreme Court to strike down any state laws, which is the inevitable conclusion of interpreting the Ninth Amendment as being something that would necessitate an abortion right at the federal level. That would mean that the Supreme Court could strike down any law as long as they could portray it as violating a right of some kind. And I don't think the Supreme Court feels comfortable enough in its precedent to make that kind of move. I mean, this is all a game. The Supreme Court can say whatever it wants to. They can say that Lord Xenu, the Galactic Emperor, told them to make a decision, and they can make a decision, and it would still be as legally enforceable had they given some kind of arduous legal argument from first principle. I mean, in case there's anyone out there who still thinks this means anything, I'm sure the argument will be that there is that there is some kind of understanding when the Constitution was written that abortion was a right. Oh, but this is ridiculous. We know that states had abortion bans in place in the 19th century and the 18th century. There were frequent bans on abortion and abortifacients and distribution of abortifacients. You can find legally permissive regimes in the West from here and there across Western history, but the mainstay of most Western jurisprudence has been regulations on how abortion is obtained and distributed by medical professionals. And so there's no logical basis for which you can discover a right in intention from the Ninth Amendment, how it's written. But again, does it really matter? I mean, it doesn't, right? It doesn't. This is all window dressing. This is a narrative. This is a story they tell to their base so that their base can feel like they somehow are embodying an intellectual trajectory that got them from point A to point B. I have a number of friends who are lawyers and who are progressives, and I have frequently asked them to explain how the living Constitution works and how the idea of basically legal powers that grow exclusively from precedent that's stacked one on top of the other, how that actually plays out in any kind of logic that lay people can understand. And there's never really any answer to this. It's all bullshit. I can't even really repeat the idea of I can argue for textualism, I can argue for originalism, I can argue for various other ideas of the stare decisis, that there should be a strong priority given to precedent. But this idea that some justices have that the Constitution lives based on popular perception, there's no, as far as I'm aware of, I don't think there's any serious intellectual argument that has ever been sold to people who are already 100% on board with the direction that this Constitution is going to live in. I mean, that's sort of the first question you get, right? So it's very obvious that the Constitution can live in the direction of progress. Can the Constitution live in the direction of a right-wing victory? Can the Constitution develop an understanding of fetal rights to life? It certainly has an implicit understanding of citizens' right to life. I mean, I think that's mentioned in the 14th Amendment explicitly. And of course, that's ridiculous, right? But it's ridiculous because the argument is not actually an argument. It's a post hoc excuse about how the progressives roll out to motivate their activist base, to pretend like there's some kind of intellectual tradition when it's really just groupthink. intellectual groupthink, academic groupthink that goes on and justifies activist funding and funding for broader political movements, and also justifies all these legal journals that I mean, when you think about it, I mean, how much, why is there this broad, the law should be simple, right? Why are there all these legal journals with these endless interpretations of different laws and legal regimes? I guess maybe you could put this under the purview of political science, but this is sort of the realm where critical race theory came out of. This is Derek Bell's beat. These journals exist to come up with convoluted ideas that judges can employ to justify decisions that really have more to do with activism and have more to do with securing power for the bureaucracy and the oligarchy that rules an unelected government than it has anything to do with what was actually written on a piece of paper that comes from the 18th century and that has been amended mostly in the 19th century. And that's not really law, how we've interpreted it. I mean, we all know this is true. I mean, I don't know. In some sense, even talking about this, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir. I'm making these arguments like there's someone out there who hasn't, well, okay, I'm sure there are people out there who haven't read Joseph de Maistre's treatise on the generative nature of constitutions, which there's an audiobook out there of me reading if you want to hear me read it. I kind of fumble through some of the French expressions, but it's really good. It's really snappy. But this whole idea that government can be constrained by written documents is kind of nuts. It's kind of ridiculous. There is a sense in which it's true. There's a sense in which the ruling class, which hopefully is either the military caste or tightly connected to the military caste, they feel embarrassed and obligated to the priest and intellectual caste enough so that they're very, very, very careful to always keep their promises and to always keep their oaths, because they know that the second they're accused of being an oath breaker, they will immediately lose the mandate of heaven. They will immediately have the legitimacy of their government called into question, and there'll be 1,000 people snapping at their heels waiting to replace them as the next king. That is what created our whole idea of rule of law. That's what created liberalism in the West, or the preconditions for liberalism in the West. The idea of the sacred oath, or the sacred promise, or the idea that rulers always had to keep good to their word. That is what exerts the actual force of a written document to the extent it exists. It's expressed in the Constitution as a secondary feature, as an emanation of a more fundamental religious sensibility that always holds people to the literal words of oaths. But once God can contradict himself, once the Holy Scripture can speak in riddles, and the Brahmin class itself can innovate new ideas every time it meets in their own cabals and consults the seer stones, then the idea that this ruling class that literally comes up with new notions of what's right and wrong every decade, the idea that a promise from 50, 100, 200 years ago is going to constrain them is absolutely nuts. At the end of the day, Carl Schmitt, building on Joseph de Maistre, was right. The sovereign is he who decides the exception. And in the state where very few people take promises seriously, the state that we're currently moving into, almost everything is an exception. And so we come into contact with raw sovereignty, which we experience in the incompetent and monstrous hands of the mutants who rule us as tyranny. We keep on coming into contact with this raw sovereignty again and again and again and again, and it's impossible. You being sort of this evolved ape, this embodied soul in the body of an ape, let's marry the two, and it's designed to enrage you. It's evolutionarily designed to enrage you because you know for a fact that you're being ruled by a weak government that's making incorrect decisions for the good of the polis. But furthermore, I think it's designed to irritate you. It's designed to try to get you angry, because having angry right-wingers is one of the only ways the left can energize their base to come out and vote for them anymore. So, that's really the long and the short of it. So I don't know. I appreciate the sentiment that that they're shifting their argumentation. I wish I could say that would actually make a difference, but it's probably not, right? Saffron Park. I have to double click that one. Okay, Saffron Park. I suggest involvement in the pro-life movement as a way to find and build a network with based people, not to mention its inherent goodness. Also, good women like men who love babies. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. This is always... Has anyone seen that episode of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia? So It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia is this story about... it's basically, it continues on the tradition of prestige television making fun of the lower middle class. They started with The Simpsons and dinosaurs, and now they're on to sort of single lower middle class people. And so it has... it's about this group of friends who owns a bar in Philadelphia, and their hijinks to concoct plans to really succeed in very petty ways that will never materially advance them in any way that will actually solve their problems. And one of the episodes is the two friends trying to pick up chicks, one at a pro-life event and one at a pro-choice event, and that always reminds me of that. If you want to get involved in conservative politics, the pro-life movement is certainly a place to start. I think that it's I don't know. I never really got... I was involved with it a little bit because I was involved with the Catholic Church, who was very, very active in that scene for about 10 years. And, but I don't know what the scene looks like if you just show up without, being part of a church and just say, hey, chief, put me on the street handing out flyers. I would do it because people should generally do charity work just as the Jewish people say, a mitzvah. I don't know what the Christian equivalent of that is. There really isn't any. It's not how people of a Gothic mindset look at things, right? We don't look at things in positive. We look at things in avoiding negative, evil. I don't know how it would look. I don't know. I think that when it comes to finding women, and I know people ask me this a lot, you want to kind of be as direct as possible, and you want to do things that will win you the respect of other men. That's the most important thing. So if you're a singleton, you show up and you spend 5 hours on a street corner distributing pro-life pamphlets, a good thing. Do your good deed for the day. Try to save people. Try to advance a necessary cause forward. But I don't think this is gonna. I really want to discourage people from seeing this as a fast track to meeting women. Unless you do it the right way, you probably won't. It might actually be even more helpful if you come with a group of men and do that. Because if you come with a group of other young men and you're all friends, that's immediately going to kind of give you a little bit of sway. That's immediately going to open up a lot of possibilities for how you approach your work inside of activism. Really, my advice to most young men who ask me about meeting women, make some good male friends and try to meet them and do things together that are as competitive as possible. I said that kind of tongue-in-cheek, but kind of not. A competition, even if it's like the chess club or even if it's like some nerdy gaming thing that I like, it's always good to do that. And the reason why I say competitiveness is important is that the mode of winning men's respect, that's what you want to kind of fall back on. You want to be like, okay, well, I'm the guy who scored this goal for the team when we were down, 0-1, right before when we went to penalty kicks because I did this awesome completion in football or soccer, or I had this game-saving catch in baseball, or I was the guy who took this tournament of this chess tournament or Warhammer tournament or whatever. I pulled our team through, and that day I was the hero of the hour. Having those kind of memories in your back pocket, first of all, it's going to create a dynamic around yourself that is comfortable, but it teaches you to see yourself in the way that you want women to see you. Of course, I tell this to people, no wife is ever going to see her husband as some kind of epic hero. And no husband is going to see, this is for interracial marriages, always keep in mind that no wife is ever going to be exotic, right? You can't, there's never been you can't marry an exotic woman because exoticness is an emotion of novelty, and marriage is for life, and the novelty is eventually going to wane. But there always is a little bit of mystery on the part of men's attraction to women, and there's always a little bit of heroism on the part of a women's attraction to men. And the problem that a lot of millennials and younger have is that they just don't develop anything inside themselves that they really respect themselves for. They individually haven't impressed themselves. They haven't impressed other men. And because of that, all of their confidence is kind of a meme. It's kind of an ironic joke. It's a front. And you can kind of swing that. But even then, you need other men to kind of teach you how to roll with the punches. This is why you might understand that men insult each other as a way of breaking the ice. They shit test each other. This whole pickup artist community talks about women shit testing men. Women don't shit test men as much as men shit test other men. And the only thing women are doing is they're saying, hey, I wonder if this man has actually earned the respect of other men. And the way she does that is to kind of throw you a backhanded compliment or a little bit of an insult and see how you react to it. And the proper reaction among men and the proper reaction among women is to kind of brush aside the insult, make a joke about it, move on, and keep on being your gregarious self and keep the party going and keep the optimism going and make sure everyone feels good about where they are, and then just kind of water under the bridge. That's the proper way to react to it, both in its male and female incarnation. And the problem is that when the shit test, it's designed to sort of uncover people with false confidence. It's designed to people who are putting on airs, or people who are saying, I figured it all out, blah, 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 blah. And then they've said this in front of the mirror to themselves a bunch of times. But they haven't had external validation. They haven't had something that they really respect about themselves. They'll immediately collapse when they get insulted in this way, and they'll spurg out. And that kind of uncovers something about them that's deeply unattractive to women. And that's, it's very overcomable with men. You can easily recover from it with men a lot easier. Women are much more the first impressions type deal, so that's harder. But that's a classic thing inside male communities. You'll see this a lot too with a lot of men, a lot of high achievers actually. They'll also kind of fail shit tests occasionally because they're just so used to, they've had so much luck. Some of it's been their incredible skill, and some of it's been their incredible luck, and some of it's been their network and the circumstances of their life. But for whatever reason, they've built up real confidence, but they still fail shit tests because the circumstances of their life have never put them in a situation where they've really had to be one of the guys. They've always been kind of over the other guys. And so there's sort of this shoot the moon thing. Like, I think Donald Trump has failed a few shit tests. I think he has. He's recovered from a lot of them, but he can be easily flustered. And, I don't think if you're as accomplished as that, if you're as rich as that, it probably doesn't make a big difference. But, but learning that and incorporating it as part of your own self-image is very important for men. Okay. Ben White for $3. My vision's kind of going. Okay. Ben White, it says 15, but it's 3, I believe. Well, I'll say 15. Ben White, one reason I stopped being libertarian is because I've never read a compelling libertarian argument against abortion. I was blown away when I read Catholic teaching on abortion. It's so good. Well, this is actually an indication of a more fundamental issue with libertarianism. Libertarianism is sort of the perfect autistic way of reacting to the world. It's a set of coherent rules to organize human social organization, and it even works in some situations, in some sort of weird historical situations. Those historical situations being when people care a lot about promises and keeping promises. I don't think libertarianism works good in societies where you can't rely on promises, but we'll get into that later. But a more foundational attack, you might superficially say, okay, I know abortion is wrong, and libertarians don't really have a good argument against abortion, and some libertarians like Ayn Rand have argued for abortion, blah 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 blah. So I don't know, I'm using this incorrectly intentionally, but by contraposition, you can deduce that libertarianism is wrong. Sure, but that's kind of not really the big question in libertarianism. Is the more fundamental question. Okay, so if everything is about consent, did you consent to be born? Right, well, you didn't, right? Did you consent to have your father and mother be your father and mother? Did you consent to the this is, I guess, increasingly true that you did consent to the circumstances that where you met your spouse. But it used to be most people who met their spouses either met them through sort of pseudo arrangements or they met them accidentally. And you keep on going down the line. Did you consent for your son to be born? Did you consent to be 6 foot tall and not 6'3"? Or did you consent to have a weight problem or a narrow nasal passage or whatnot? Or body hair in places, whatever. Did you consent to have any number of things that define your personality and define the life as you live it and experience it in various different ways? And the answer to all these questions is no. Then there's sort of this, then you immediately see this. And what's the problem? When I say autism, what I really mean is intellectual myopia, and that's the problem of the depth first search in computer science. It's where you kind of burrow down so much on one topic, you ignore the broader picture, and this is the problem. We say autism because it's a problem that people who suffer from that mental disability or challenge frequently fall into themselves, and mental myopia doesn't sound nearly as catchy, and so I can't say mental myopia, so I say autistic, right? So I mean, what you see then is that you have this idea of organizing human social organizations that relies on it relies on several preconditions. It relies on certain, I brought them up with Adam and Sitch. It relies on a certain amount of societal order, the most obvious one being that people value and keep their promises. But on a more fundamental level than that, what this relies on is, so there's sort of skyhooks attached to libertarianism. The other problem is that just as a human, when you talk about what gives your life meaning, when you talk about what gives your life purpose, and you honestly assess this question, you'll realize very, very quickly that the things that give your life the most meaning, the most purpose, are things that in many ways you didn't choose. And so, and then you start asking whether the fundamental foundation for libertarianism, the moral commitment to order and goodness outside of ourselves, is not somehow linked to our fundamental instinct for meaning that we inevitably find deriving from things that exist outside of our choice and our consent than things that have existed within it. And that to me is the big thread that eventually unravels libertarianism. You can either make it into a question of foundations, or more powerfully, you can make it into a question about philosophical and moral relevance to any given political question. Once we acknowledge, practically speaking, that we as humans have minds that gravitate towards concepts of power and privilege and promise that really hold concepts of liberty to be more ancillary concepts, then to prefer to focus on liberty, even though it makes the math equations add up, seems to be practically inconsistent. It seems to be sort of practically betraying what we know to be empirical reality of human politics, simply to have a system of organizing human relations that really only works in a few historical circumstances and can't bring forth the circumstances that it relies on being true to create in the first place. Anyway, thank you very much, Ben White. Speaking of Adam and Sitch, are Adam and Sitch still doing their live streams? I unsubscribed from them. I can just imagine them going. I mean, I was like, newsflash, guys, Vosh contradicted himself. Oh my God. It's only going to be a little bit now, Vosh. You're going to completely humiliate yourself and your fans are going to abandon you. really they should have learned by now the very thing I'm trying to explain about liberalism. The reason why people like Vosh, it's Vosh, right? There's no sort of there's no ow in it. The people like the reason why people like Vosh is because, well, several reasons. First, it gives them it gives them this narrative where they're always going to win. It gives them this idea. It's very transparent that leftism wins broadly in the political sphere. It's very apparent for a lot of white people that increasingly leftism is getting, or at least mainstream leftism, is getting very hostile to you and very hostile to both your individual and collective interests. And so what people are starved for is that they signed up for politics because they thought politics would give them meaning. But suddenly, without a narrative of their own victory, they can't make it meaningful anymore. So in comes Vosh. Vosh gives them the illusion that if they got on the right brand of leftism, not only would their political debates be an unbroken string of victories on to suddenly uplands. No one can defeat Vosh in a debate, even though he's lost most of them I've ever seen him be in. And so this mythology of indefeatability in the debate ring is critical, not simply to Vosh's own branding, but to the emotional effect that he creates for his users, because they want this idea of victory so that politics can feel meaningful. And so Vosh is really more of a totem. The impression that among his fans that he never loses is created by his fans believing in him. And the second, or simply repeating to themselves that he's never lost. He doesn't convince anyone, certainly. And they don't care if he contradicts himself. They don't care if his his principles change. They don't care if his positions change. They don't care if he's made a fool out of himself again and again and again online. What they care about is the narrative that they're always on top, that they're winning. And that's something that we can't take away from them. That's not something that we can wake them up from. It's a conclusion that they're going to have to come to themselves. And unfortunately, I think, Adam and Such's idea of fighting Vosh's entertainment product with their own entertainment product is kind of ridiculous. Personally, I find Adam and Such's fan base much more baffling than I find Vosh's. Because they must know at this stage, through all these interactions, that there's no substantive worldview that can escape from the critiques brought to it, either from the right or the left wing. The only thing they can do is try to point out contradictions that occur in other people's arguments with the assumption that some form of moderate liberalism is the default position, which, it's increasingly and obviously not. Okay, moving on. Aristocratic Owl. Okay, another one. Aristocratic Owl for $15 USA. I hate when people bring up Roe v. Wade right and left, then make a moral issue in the legal field. As someone trying to study law, I say keep your morality out of law, and that's not a lawyer's job. Well, you're technically right. Technically, as a judge, your idea is just to decide the law as it has been written by the legislator or by the sovereign. But the Supreme Court has not been a strict legal body since the Warren Court. The Supreme Court have been priest guardians. That's what they. I think you should study law, Aristocratic Owl. I think if you can get a job doing it, it's a useful profession to have. But it's we have to understand that's not the role that the law plays for most people inside mainstream blue America. At this stage, the idea of democracy is itself a comprehensive and totalizing religious worldview, and the notion of progress has become a totalizing religious goal. And what the judge's role of, either if it's on the Ninth Circuit or in the Supreme Court, is to take that religious worldview, commitment to the established bureaucracy, the established oligarchy that we call democracy. It's to reconcile our loyalty to the established bureaucracy with our with our ambitions to always have an unending string of progressive victories, because the priests know that if you go too crazy in one direction, that threatens the cohesion of the religion itself. Part of the job of the Brahmin class is to crack down on fundamentalists. People don't oftentimes realize this, but one of the big jobs of priest castes is to make sure that religious believers don't purity spiral themselves into burning each other all at the stakes for minor acts of heresy, which they totally will in isolation. And so necessarily the progressives have realized since the war in court that there is a priest-shaped hole in our society, and they might as well step into it. And if they don't step into it, the society is going to fall apart, which it manifestly has. Or I don't think it's imminently falling apart, but it's definitely, we're going down the road of collapse very clearly. And, I encourage you to study law, but this perspective that law is a linguistic profession where you interpret the words of documents and the intention of the people who wrote them. This is not the role that I think most powerful people imagine as the necessary role of lawyers. And I think that 60 years of progressive jurisprudence have more or less proved this to my satisfaction. And I think it's tragic, but it's just the reality that we live in right now. I wish it was different. Aristocratic Owl again. For $10. The one problem I have with this decision is not that Roe v. Wade got overturned, because every legal scholar understands that it was the worst legal decision in English history. The problem I have is the way they took the decision without a careful breakdown of older legal history before Roe. They took without a careful breakdown of older legal history before Roe. I think the word count limits constraining you there, Aristocratic Owl, but I got the gist. I think what you're talking about is substantive due process. The idea that from the penumbra of the Fourth Amendment and the 14th Amendment, we can create a certain idea of privacy rights that allows us to manufacture new rights basically out of pure precedent. And this goes back to Griswold v. Connecticut for birth control. I believe that was in the 40s. I think it was in the 40s. Then it carries over to obviously Roe v. Wade, and then finally it ends up with even in Lawrence v. Texas, which is the gay marriage decision. And substantive due process is just an affront to. Substantive due process is an affront to the idea of consistent rule by law. There's no logical way that anyone who supports substantive due process ever imagines substantive due process cutting against something he wouldn't want for other reasons. I have never seen that. The people who support substantive due process thinks that it manufactures rights that he supports and no other ones he does not support. And that sort of that indicates post hoc reasoning, obviously, and it's an affront to law. Just like zero interest rate capitalism is an affront to capitalism, substantive due process is an affront to rule by law. If we ever had rule by law in the way libertarians imagined we had rule by law, which I don't think. I mean, we did kind of, but not in the way that they oftentimes imply. But thank you for the chat. Okay, Ben White for $15 USA. The lack of chastity and acceptance of contraception, even among Christians, needs to be addressed in order to fight the culture of death. Man must realize that sex and procreation cannot be unlinked. Well, this is absolutely true. I don't want to get into this conversation again about, this has been a theme of the channel going back to when I started it in 2016, is the problem that the sexual revolution is our ultimate enemy, and not Roe v. Wade or abortion in particular. And once you have the acknowledgement by the culture that sex exists autonomously as an individual recreation or a right to recreation by individuals, then not only have you kind of destroyed any understanding of family law, in my opinion, you also have created a contradiction in human nature that leads to circumstances that just can't be put together again. I guess, for the right wing, the question is not really whether we should enforce it. We absolutely should try to enforce traditional sexual norms as much as possible. The real question is, how are we going to deal with exceptions? I'm thinking of the whole Bronze Age pervert thing with this whole based right-wing fornication deal. I don't want to pick fights with these people, but then again, I don't. In any community that I'm involved with where I know people are dating, I'm going to pretty much explicitly tell the men of that community that they need, that their dating life needs to be organized around discernment for marriage. That's the advice I'm going to give, because and this is what's so ridiculous, is that any community that doesn't have that is inevitably finds itself in crisis. And this is, I've recognized this multiple times, and you've seen this if you've watched drama unfold on the right wing, is there is a case that women should just not be involved in politics. There's a case that really very few people other than a sovereign king himself should be strictly involved in politics, other than in an intellectual capacity. But once we sort of put aside those more spicy takes that come from the 19th century and earlier, all human history before the 20th century, once we put those aside and we're in a political environment where men and women are interacting with each other, and then you take the next step and you respond to one of the first super chatters who proposed you could meet women in right-wing activism groups. Oh my God, where does that end, right? If you're not actually obeying the rules, I'll tell you where this ends. And this ends with scandal. This ends with scandal that's going to cause more damage to the movement that you head than it's going to cause than any benefit you got from breaking the rules to begin with, or tolerating breaking those rules. And I don't need to remind this, there have been numerous Christian scandals where this has occurred. There have been numerous secular right-wing scandals where this has occurred. It's so obvious. It's like Always Sunny in Philadelphia, right? One of them, he sleeps with a pro-life woman, and he's surprised that she thinks he's going to marry her. This is ridiculous. The whole point of right-wing causes is to essentially facilitate a concept of political order, which means people keeping their promises. There is no properly ordered woman who does not consider sex to be an implicit promise of commitment. And if a woman tells you that she does not think sex is an implicit promise to commitment, she's probably lying. And so, once that's going to cause once one or two women get spun like this, and that's going to cause a cascading ripple. Even if you're not a prominent figure, that's going to cause a cascading ripple through the system, and the whole thing's going to, as the Franklin put it, it's going to fall in a giant heap. But yes, I agree with you. Aristocratic Owl for $3. When you overturn a case, you have to be careful because it brings in new rules that can lead to a further politicized court that feels no case is left off the chopping block. Well, yeah, I agree with you in the abstract, Aristocratic Owl, but okay, I think maybe I need to revise one of my original statements that I said at the beginning of this, where I said there's really no buttons that the left wing can press anymore that it hasn't already pressed. One of the ones that they certainly could press is the concept of court packing, especially if they come out of 2024 or 2022 feeling energized, which seems to be unlikely, but there could be fortification. the left, even if they don't go as far as court packing, the left is going to try some measure that will further politicize the court. I really don't know how anything the right wing can do is going to stop the court from politicizing itself. There's just no way that a society that has no moral center is not going to have a Supreme Court, a lower circuit court, that isn't just a contest of politics ruled over by a Brahmin priest class. That was necessitated by the fact that our society lost its moral core, and furthermore looked to politics what it should have been properly getting from religion. But thank you very much, Aristocratic Owl. Antimatter Bone Crusher. Antimatter Bone Crusher. For $15 USA. What is the NRX solution to inflation? Well, Antimatter Bone Crusher, you are so in luck, because if you are an old fan of unqualified reservations, you will know that inflationary monetary policy is one of, among the neo-reactionary writers, it was one of their favorite topics. Obviously, right-wingers in general, there are a lot of different schools of thought. There are distributists, there are Georgists, there are people who believe in mercantilism or free market. There's the Chicago school, there's the Austrian school, blah, 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 the whole Mrs. people. But what tends to unify all right-wingers on one side and all left-wingers on the other, some weird unorthodox Marxists notwithstanding, is the fact that the right wing is anti-inflationary monetary policy and the left wing is pro-inflationary monetary policy. Specifically through the institution of the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is a bank. It's technically private, but it's basically controlled by the federal government that prints money and then uses the printed money to create loans at pre-specified interest rates that it then gives to banks under the idea that this supercharges the economy, because since we own the world's reserve currency, we can essentially teleport money from the future into the present, because this will be, since it goes to the banks, it will be taken out as business loans and then invested in the economy. And since the economy always grows, we'll be able to grow the money in terms of products and services that we initially printed, but as opposed to printing money in response to economic growth, we'll be printing money to drive economic growth. And of course, Keynesians believe that you should hand this out through government programs, and that's sort of a difference there. There is no school on the right wing that does not think we should dump a giant torpedo on this policy. They consider it to be irresponsible. I consider it to be irresponsible. I consider this inflationary monetary policy to be one of the great lies of the 20th century. It makes absolutely no sense. It leads to economies that are built on absolutely nothing, that are built on sand and financial promises in the future. And furthermore, it robs money from poor people because perennially low interest rates, which are what the government eventually the government has to pursue, rock bottom interest rates in order to keep its own promises going into the future, in order for it to be able to generate enough revenue to pay off its own spending, which means essentially that we're giving money to rich people because rich people will be able to take out loans through investment and through their participation in investment banks. They'll be able to invest it in the economy, and since the economy necessarily is being rigged to go up always, they'll just get money from that. This is sort of the classic question that Yarvin brings to a boomer. A boomer has this boat, and the author asks, well, how did you get the boat? How did you afford this? And the guy's like, well, my mutual fund did well. And then the question is, well, okay, I appreciate that you made money, but hypothetically, classically speaking, there's a value that was generated for the money that was given to you, right? So when you work, you obviously put money into the economy and you get a paycheck. And when you invest, hypothetically, what you're doing is you're adding information. You have some knowledge that this prospect is a good prospect, that it will actually be a sound financial enterprise. And you are investing in it early, and because you've given this key critical information to the market system, you get to reap the benefits from investing in it when other people did not invest in it. But when it comes to these general mutual funds, there's no one made a decision. They just invested in the general economy, and the general economy went up because we printed money to make it go up. And so this is apt. And what are the people who can't do that? Poor people or middle class people. Middle class people cannot take out loans and just buy into the economy and then retire from life the way that most rich people do in low interest rate economies. And so the whole economy becomes this giant joke on working class schlubs who have to pull down a wage that's inflating while everyone else is just making money because their stocks are going up. The problem, though, antimatter bone crusher, is that this is what many NRX thinkers have called a regime-complete problem. There is no way that you can take down the Federal Reserve without destroying the United States government. Because everything at this point relies on funding that's basically bought from borrowing, which is shored up by the fact that we're literally printing money. If we suddenly had rational interest rates, we would be crushed under the weight of our own debt. And everyone in government knows this, and no one wants to actually deal with this inflation issue. I mean, they tried a little bit last week, they tapped on the interest rate brakes just a little bit, and the economy crashed. All of the gains that occurred over Biden's entire presidency were obliterated in one day because they were all fake. They were all money teleported from the future into the present through the power of illusionary money printed from the U.S. mints under the idea that it's a loan from the Federal Reserve. Moldbug has this crackpot theory where you can do this sort of hat trick where if you had 100% of the political power, you could sort of capsize the Fed and issue new dollars in exactly the same way where they lie currently, blowing up all of our debt and giving our creditors a giant haircut in some sense, because a lot of the creditors are us itself. But this would you could never do this unless you ruled the entire government. There's no way you could be a president and go, hey guys, we're going to just delete the Federal Reserve and issue new dollars that stand in place of the old dollars that are massively inflated. That's the main problem with that is that every element of the unelected government is going to stand in the way of that happening, because they understand definitively that the second the government does that, a penny that is not a penny of spending in the government is a penny of taxes. And people will go from not really caring, what exactly is it that the Homeland Security Department does, to really caring, or just deleting it altogether because there's no money to support that. And they'll fight it with every bone in their body. So, if you want to read up more on this, I recommend any of the massive essays that Yarvin wrote about monetary theory, either on unqualified reservations or on Gray Mirror. I think most of them are, in public domain. You can get them. Hunger for $5 USA. I'm genuinely surprised how underwhelming the reaction of the pro-abortion crowd was. Was Yarvin right about Joe Biden sucking all the energy and coolness from the progressive left? I think it's just, I really think it's just, people are tired of politics, man. People are tired of politics. They can't motivate themselves to get interested in politics in any kind of meaningful way. And these women who are upset about Roe v. Wade, anyone who sees these women, it's hard to imagine how they're either utilizing these services or should in any kind of optimized life for themselves not need to use them. The idea that these are feminists who are kind of blazing their own path through the corporate world, and abortion is just a tool to keep this engine of triumph going, that's not on display. These are people that either have lives that aren't started yet and are doing it from the social media clout, or they're people who have who've been broken by the system, some through mistakes they made, some through no fault of their own, and who are clamoring onto this issue as something that might momentarily give them meaning. And the energy just is not there. The energy was there for COVID because it felt like we were in a moment of crisis. But the culmination of that crisis really was the election of Joe Biden in January 6th. And, if the pot at the end of the rainbow looks like Joe Biden, maybe the princess is in another castle. I mean, what do progressives really have to look forward to? The thing that really sets aside most radical progressives like El Chapo Trap House and Vosh and the likes, and Hassan Piker, whatever the Young Turks nephew guy who the bro communist, who owns like some kind of penthouse or some kind of fancy schmaltzy house in Beverly Hills. What distinguishes them from earlier iterations of sort of dematurgic socialists is that none of their followers reasonably thinks that they're ever going to implement socialism or see socialism implemented in their lives. But the key product of the right wing has to be, we're talking about forming families right now. We're talking about policies where you pursue them, you could actually have a better chance of buying a house. We're talking about changes to the sexual marketplace where if you implemented these changes, you might actually have your children, your daughter, have a husband and a family and purpose. We're talking about actually having meaning in your life that is not controlled by how fast you do your data entry job in your mid-tier HR resource position. That's something that the right can offer people. That's something that the right can offer millennials that the leftists can't. The left is manifestly ugly, and that's what's really hurting them. They have this huge head of steam, but there's sort of this understanding that it can't go on forever. All right, again with Antimatter Bone Crusher. For $5, isn't the signaling of going for national bans and overturning gay marriage a supremely bad tactic? Isn't this over-eagerly grasping for power in the childish way a leftist does? Well, with the left, grasping for power always works. So how childish can it be? It depends, Antimatter Bone Crusher, what you really are saying, right? If you're saying the right shouldn't flex on the left, or the right shouldn't triumphantly say, today abortion, tomorrow gay marriage, to the Capitol. Like, it should never say that. It should never flex like that. Because it's obviously transparently a lie and it feeds into the progressive narrative. It is infantile in that regard. But that being said, no right-winger who's worth his salt is not against gay marriage, is not against substantive due process, and against all of this stuff. This idea that we should, in our positions, silently held and prudently maintained, that we should change our positions, attitudes towards things that moderates think are radical, is absolutely positively insane. The only thing that can possibly supplant the progressive movement and actually give it pause is a movement of right-wingers that genuinely believes in itself. And it's transparent that for the first time in a long time, there are a lot of genuine right-wing believers, and there are a lot of left-wing grifters who are just doing this for the grift, who are doing this for the show. And their promises of socialism are absolutely transparent, are absolutely transparently. They're basically just fantasies that they're held out. So in the same way that your average video game e-thought holds up the fantasy that she'll be your girlfriend. It's no different. This brings to mind another development that occurred this week, which is that there were some people like David French who tried to hop back on. I mean, I don't know if he really did this, but the memes, at least, on Telegram implied that David French, who's an avowed pro-lifer, was trying to hop back on the Trump bandwagon. And now that Trump's changes to his to give the devil his due, mostly through luck, but Trump's changes nonetheless gave the conservative victory the greatest victory it had in the last 50 years. So there's those sort of Johnny-come-lately normie conservatives. But there's also another class of conservatives, and here I'm thinking of people, I don't know if it's David Rubin, but there certainly have been a few of them. I think the Weinstein brothers may have wavered a little bit, who are like, oh no, guys, this shows that all all this time, like the right-wingers were the real threat. The right-wingers were the real threat. So we have to make our goal from this point to oppose extremism. And extremism, where it really lies, is with the Supreme Court and its decision to maybe kind of illegalize or restrict abortions in some red states. The person who really kind of dived in with both feet to this is Carolyn Borisenko, who's this utterly bad actor. This person is less than useless for the right wing. She was somebody who, because of wokeness in knitting communities and because of the friendliness of Trump voters, temporarily in 2020 shifted from the left to the right, or at least was convinced to vote one time for Donald Trump. The problem is that this woman, she was this host of absolutely insane ideas that you see from cartoonishly confused white women. And I'm using that term a little bit loosely, not to imply anything about Borisenko or maybe to imply, life history. But what was revealed is that Borisenko believed that anti-whiteness was only wrong to the extent that it hurt other minority communities like Jews and Asians, and that any attempt to point out the fact that the anti-white rhetoric might have a negative impact on white people or Gentile Europeans or indigenous Europeans was the short path to the Third Reich. This is such an insanely idiotic take that it's worth absolutely nothing. It concedes the entire frame to the left. It admits that they have the right to do a double standard. And the reason why they have a right to do a double standard is something heard or hand wave towards Hitler or something like that. And it ignores the manifest harm that's caused by just explicit bigotry towards indigenous Europeans. And this was complemented by the fact that when the question was shifted towards other minority communities that sometimes fall under the purview of whiteness, of course, Borisenko had a much different answer. And now this week, Carolyn Borisenko is 100% back on the bandwagon of the brown menace. We have to make sure that the Republicans never win another election ever again because this is such a setback for women. The fact that there might be some restrictions on abortions in red states. This is less than nothing. The most important thing, Antimatter Bone Crusher, is to be firm in your moral convictions, to be honest about them, and to never give frame. You do not need to flex in order to be able to do that. You don't need to imprudently promise things that you can't possibly deliver on, like an end to Lawrence v. Texas, the gay marriage decision. But you cannot take a step back. You cannot pull David Frenchisms, and you certainly cannot allow people like David Rubin and Carolyn Borisenko to establish the parameters of your own moral systems. If you do that, the slow and eternal beauty of your own side will immediately be devoured into the cynicism of minor political victories in the short term. And you're trading. Your great heritage as a right-winger is that you have an ideology that's actually believable and that I certainly believe is actually true. And you're sacrificing the truth of those ideals to what? To look moderate? To not inspire a left-wing backlash? The left-wing backlash is going to come regardless of what you do. The one thing you should do as an adult is to not flex. Less so because somewhat because it will kind of re-inspire the left to have wind in their sails again, but mostly because not flexing shows you to be the adult in the room, and that above anything else is the kind of thing that throws a big monkey wrench into the spokes of the left wing. Okay, but thank you very much, Antimatter Bone Crusher. I need to get going because I am getting tired and I'm not getting to the end of these chats. That's the 21st reaction. The 21st reaction. Have you watched Rick and Morty BoJack Horseman? Very boring revolving door of narcissism and nihilism to the unchanging main character over many seasons. Any other shows that are like this? So 21st Reaction did a video on BoJack Horseman. The two people I always need to... I keep on forgetting to show these people. But 21st Reaction and Fearless Missillary are two great content creators that you should totally look up, and I will definitely promote Phyllis when I get a chance. I owe him a live stream, and I figure that I promote his channel after I do the live stream with him. But 21st Reaction, definitely check out the channel. He gave a great talk at the Siblings Conference, and I hope to see them there again in next year's conference. Hopefully I'll have a more spiritually aware talk to give, one less about progressives. But yeah, I mean, Rick and Morty is kind of hilarious how empty it is. Like, I'll admit here that I genuinely did like the first season of Rick and Morty, some episodes. The one I liked was the one with the brain parasites, where the brain parasites, it's kind of like a game of Mafia. They pose as people, and when you come in contact with them, they pose as zany characters that you that they have memories of. They manufacture memories. They insert them telepathically in your mind. And so at the end of the day, you can't distinguish who are the shapeshifters from who are the real characters. And this was first of all sort of a Revenge of the Body Snatchers plot, but it was also a joke about how sitcoms introduce zany characters through just sort of random flashbacks, like, oh, you remember this person, right? He's been a part of the show all along. And of course, your suspension of disbelief goes along with this misperception. And that was a great episode. But Rick and Morty, and I did a video on this like in 2018, it was just so transparently hollow. It didn't have, other than sort of making jokes about how smart it was, once its fans realized that it was smart, it couldn't get out of that trap. Zero H.P. Lovecraft has this saying. He says that remember that no matter what you like, no matter what you think is true, eventually if you obtain power, the dumbest people in the world are going to be quoting back the thing you like, and you're going to have to hear them totally mangle it. And Rick and Morty, it couldn't survive the show's the social media presence of its own midwit fans who completely embarrassed the more intelligent fans. And then in later seasons, they tried to go super meta. They tried to stack meta upon meta upon meta. But then it just became boring because at the end of the day, nothing was at stake. Absolutely nothing could possibly be at stake because there were so many levels of reality and everything could be undone. And it was something that no meaning could be concocted out of it because the second meaning was created, they would immediately undermine that meaning in the next show. And that's the same thing, I think, with BoJack Horseman. Postmodernism devours itself because it alludes to sincerity on the margins, but it can never actually believe in sincerity because at the end of the day, sincerity has to manifest in something that you believe in. A relationship with a woman has to go past romance and into marriage. And your woman is never exotic. Your husband's never mysterious in the sort of James Bond sense, certainly. And eventually you have to normalize yourself to the idea that you have actual things you believe in, actual people you're married to, and an actual life with its ordinary disappointments and its ordinary limitations and things you can't control. And learning how to love things anyway is the task that most people have to deal with in life, and that's what they have to cope with. And there's no way around that. And the idea of postmodernism, at least lately, has always been to sort of, they've read David Foster Wallace. They know that they're all irony poisoned and no one believes them anymore. But what they do is they unroll the plot line in any given season so that it's sort of like the Little Prince, where the Little Prince asks to have the perfect lamb drawn, and his adult companion, no matter how he draws it, it's never quite right. So he draws a box and says, okay, your lamb is in that box. And the Little Prince is like, oh, it's just how I always imagined him. And that's what postmodernists do, is they always keep God or the meaning or the sincerity, they always keep it like just out of focus, just off camera. And they constantly use metapolitics to move the frame forward and forward and forward and forward and forward. And because of that, they can constantly push it. But eventually you can kind of see how the magic trick is done. Rick and Morty could do that for 2 seasons, maybe 3 in a pinch. At 4, it was so obviously up its own ass. It basically had fallen into the funhouse mirror of its own meta-analysis, and it wasn't just stupid. it was stupid in the third season. It was stupid and boring, and because of that, there was absolutely no weight to it. It could have just been like a Far Side commercial. Like, I think Saturday morning breakfast cereal did this. Like, I think most of the ideas that Rick and Morty plays on were basically lifted straight from Saturday morning breakfast cereal. Either the cartoon, the web comic, which is kind of like the Far Side but more edgy, or from the more short-lived YouTube channel, which is still pretty funny. But anyway, guys, if you want to check out more analysis and very good analysis, I highly recommend 21st Century Reactions channel. Check it out. Oh my god, I'm really behind here. Mim the Dwarf. Is that from The Ring Cycle? Or is that from Herman Hesse's Fairy Tales? I feel it's from one or the other. I'm trying to think of dwarfs. Hello, I find myself someone who could really fall under the category of bioleninism. A spiteful mutant, yet somehow still wish to ally myself with the side of good. What is the place for genetically poor men on the right, or the world at large? Is there such a thing as spiteless or noble mutants? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's well, I mean, someone joked at the conference. I won't name this individual, but I might have them on. That they saw themselves as something of a mutant, but a loyal one, and that got a huge applause. Look, most of the time, we're going to have to come to terms with the fact that we're all degenerated forms of what went before us. I am not the man my father was or my grandfather was. I'm, and neither is our society the society that came before us. And, obviously, I'm not genetically an Adonis, right? Like, I have defects, and everyone does. That's not the point. The point is to materially make the decision to support the cause of order and truth and goodness and beauty above chaos. And that is the decision. Nobody who makes that decision is evil. And the most physically perfect person is evil if they make the decision against that. This is ContraPoints is a good example. Right, so ContraPoints is a person who, in their own estimation, certainly, and you can see this. I don't want to say that you should look into the work they deleted from the internet. They had a career as a YouTube atheist and as a progressive before they did their ContraPoints channel, and certainly before they transitioned under their original dead name, quote unquote. But you see very clearly that ContraPoints has the artist that would soon be known as ContraPoints, has a very inflated opinion about their own genetic worth and their own appearance. And yet, but what do they do with that, right? If they think that they're God's gift to the genetics of the species, they don't carry it forward. They toss that gift away, and furthermore, they encourage other people to toss that gift away too. Usually the people who need to pass it on the most, and the people who need to make sacrifices to pass it on. There are no bad genes. There are simply bad decisions we make in the circumstances we find ourselves in. And the same thing is true for people who have been misformed. The same thing is true for people who've been misformed through their own society and who haven't had the proper upbringing. The point is that we want to live a society behind us that is better than the society that's been given to us. And as long as you are working towards that end, you are working towards the cause of order and truth and goodness. And really, your whatever you feel your genetic shortcomings are, they don't matter. Somebody, I'll say this, right? Somebody with genetic shortcomings, who they're complete geniuses who never have children and who never contribute to the genetics of the next generation. That sounded redundant, but I guess it's not technically. But they've actually done a worse thing than that. This is always the problem, right? This is always the problem with progressivism, is there's always this implicit categorization of good people and bad people. And you can always see it sort of coming out of the seams. There are no good people, there are no bad people, there are just good decisions. And we train there's sort of implicitly good or bad people because we train ourselves to make good or bad decisions. I can think of a bad decision I made this afternoon, like being impatient with my wife. I really felt bad about that. Like I got impatient and, it was, but that's worse than like me, being born with like an extra finger or something like that. Like that's, human beings are not, I've come to believe this to be true, and try this on Mim the dwarf. Human beings are, Edward Dutton is right that human beings are, they still have to deal with Darwinian selection, and genetic quality is something that seems to, in my opinion, there seems to be evidence that this somehow some correlation to society and how we've organized society. But to me, it's very, very obvious that the chief thing that governs this is the organization of our society and the choices we make towards the commitment of a more ordered society, not some kind of Darwinian Olympics contests. That's ridiculous. And so I think that I just want everyone to keep that in mind, even if they feel like they're not in a position to pursue the married life or the life of a family. But thank you very much, Ben the Dwarf. This also goes into this whole thing, like this whole discussing. I hate this argument. This argument from some mainly European right wingers that abortion is good because it largely falls on non-European peoples. This is. I mean, okay. First of all, from a Christian point of view, that's absolutely immoral, and so I can condemn it outright. But from a Machiavellian point of view, it's the classic thing of being it's with penny wise, pound foolish. The reason why the left is declining is because moral decisions it's made. It's not declining because it opened the abortion market up or it didn't open the abortion market up enough to Africans. That's not why it's declining. And furthermore, the embrace of abortion morally undermines the necessary structures that will need to be in place in order for, even if you're a complete Machiavellian, those moral principles of opposing abortion will need to be in place before any kind of ordered society that could possibly be eugenic could come into existence. And no, we're going to throw all of that away because in this moment, you can microcosmically manufacture some kind of you can put a drop in the ocean of some kind of hypothetical race between Europeans and Africans over who can have more offspring. I would challenge anyone to debate me on that topic from the right. I will even completely put my own Christianity in a bucket. I can argue that one as being stupid from a purely Machiavellian point of view. There is a case to be made, though, that to even engage in arguments like that is bad. I don't know. There's a case for that, right? As R.N. McIntyre says, to have the argument is to lose it. Okay. Why isn't this showing up? Numbtooth Bum. Trying to figure out why your chat's not... Oh, here it is. Okay. Numbtooth Bum for $10 USA. Sir, I'm not but an ignorant day laborer. Thank you for paving the way to many a good book and helping me feel less alone in my madcap musings. You are my sensei for reals. Well, thank you very much, Numbtooth Bum. I appreciate it. There's nothing more loyal than physical labor. God knows I have a desk job writing algorithms on a computer. It pays the bills, but it can be kind of soul-crushing not to work with your hands. So there's very few things that are more noble than actually working in a blue-collar way. Iron Duke 99 for $3. Dave, white feminist women were calling Judge Thomas a hard R and gamer word. White leftists just use black people. Well, yeah, of course they do. I mean, this is... anyone aware of the Devil's Dictionary's definition of African? It's a... Ambrose Bierce's definition is a hard N-word, gamer word, who's currently voting for me, right? Or who's currently voting for my party. That's the definition of an African, right? Yeah, so it's this is, I mean, I don't know, it's transparently the case. The problem is that there's no the thing is that this has been transparent to most observers that aren't dyed-in-the-wool progressives, that the progressive white coalition uses black people as pawns in their game. The difficulty is that the African American community has been so devastated by the sexual revolution and the war on drugs that they have no independent identity other than what the cathedral gives them. All of their leaders are leaders first for progress and only secondarily for the good of their communities. If the good of the African American community goes against the broader rules of progress, their community goes down. And with the exception of the Nation of Islam, there is no independent organization of African American elites that operates independently from the consensus of the left. And for this reason, you can point out as many times that the left is just as hateful and bigoted against Africans as the right is, maybe more, blah, 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 blah. But African Americans aren't wrong to prefer their own leaders' decisions to their own. That's what all people do. All people export their own sovereignty to people that think for them and who they believe have their interests at heart. And the African Americans aren't wrong to use that instinct here. It's just being abused. It's being undermined by the Democratic Party in a very tragic way. But again, thanks for the super chat. I have really got to get to the end. I'm not more than halfway through these things. Okay. Hunger for $3 USA. Dave, who are the best and worst villains in your rogues gallery? Vosh, French, George R. R. Martin, etc. Who would you say has the most substance? Who are the best and worst villains? You know, like, who has, like... I mean, I'm talking about, like... The problem is that when it comes to, like, people who are genuine Marxists, like Caleb Maupin or Amy Therese, these people are basically not enemies in any proximate sense. I mean, I think them being materialists and them supporting an ideology that I think is an absolute dumpster fire is a problem for me. And I don't like communists, and I think that communism is a disaster, and I don't like National Socialists, and I think National Socialism is another disaster. I don't really hold that against Keith Woods or Amy Therese or Caleb Maupin, because I understand that these are A, sincere beliefs, and B, they're not really relevant political orientations, because right now the only relevant political orientation is for the left-wing reigning ideological regime or against it. I'm assuming hunger you mean best by most intellectually serious. The most intellectually serious journalists who defend the cathedral, in my opinion, are Noah Smith and Matthew Iglesias. These people embody the intellectual height of the cathedral. They aren't really particularly woke, but they're not anti-woke, which means that they're basically woke. They don't want to actually curtail wokeness at all, and that makes them basically heralds of the woke agenda. And so I would consider them to be on the journalistic side, the height of that. And then they're sort of on the intellectual side. I would say people like Cass Sunstein, the big cathedral thinkers are like Cass Sunstein, who did the book Nudge, Steven Pinker, who originally kind of seemed a little bit based, but then turned out to be not only a complete shitlib, but in my mind, he's just an intellectual traitor, and I can explain why. But suffice to say, he gave a lecture supporting an intellectual proposition that then he stood idly by and didn't make nearly as much noise about other more notable scientists getting canceled for saying the exact same thing. And I consider that to be an incredibly evil thing. But he's definitely one of the intellectuals. And then there's sort of the singularity guys like Noel Harari, the people who did, the guy who did Sapiens, and then what's the singularity guy? Is it Neil? Frick. Oh, I'm forgetting who the singularity guy is. It's the guy who always thinks of the singularity. Singularity is England. Singularity is. I'm gonna look this up. It's bothering me too much to not get this. Ray Kurzweil. That's it. Ray Kurzweil. Yeah. So I'd say Ray Kurzweil, Harari, Pinker, and then on the journalist, I'd probably Iglesias. And I want to emphasize that on the intellectual side, all serious thinkers are thinking in this AI transhumanism stuff. There are some people who are just doing this gender stuff still, but I don't think anyone takes this seriously, because no thinking person thinks that this is anything more than a religious fascination for mid-wit political pawns. As for sort of the worst people on the left, I really dislike Chapo Trap House and any of the dirtbag left people. I think what they're doing is so unethical because they see the problems. Like, they're not delusional. They see the problems. They see the issues that the right wingers are reacting against. Yet instead of meeting for us in conversation to try to hammer out a solution, to try to create an alliance for a new political order that could solve these things, what do? They construct lolcows and they dunk on them. They dunk on the right wing, and they organize cancellation campaigns so that they can sell the illusion of power to their audience for super chats. This isn't just you can see this with like Destiny. He was one of the original people, and people are like, "Oh, Destiny had a redemption arc. Destiny had a redemption arc." Okay, I mean, this is Destiny debated what was it, Laura Towler and who's that other patriotic alternative person? I forget. Laura Towler and the leader of Patriotic Alternative about nationalism on Twitch. And recently Destiny got turned on by the left, as is always, and he got canceled. But I think he was being invited back on someone else's Twitch channel to have this debate. And it was obviously hosted on Odyssey. And he goes off on this thing about how the Great Replacement Theory is a myth. And the problem is that the patriotic alternative people, Mark Collett, that's the one. Mark Collett immediately points out that everyone admits that replacement level migration is happening and that it is going to imminently manifest itself in historically large transfers of populations that we have never seen in the modern world. And but they only crack down on this when the framing is negative. They will absolutely endorse this position as good. This is what's called moral parallax. And they will absolutely allow you to say this as long as you endorse it. And Destiny hears this and he just doesn't. He just like. I know Destiny is smart enough to understand this. I know he's smart enough to put this together. If he's leaving the left and he's just following his intellect wherever his materialist instincts take him, wherever the peer-reviewed studies take him, he should recognize this for the intellectual deception it is and actually confront it head on. But he can't, because if he does, his grift is over. And so he keeps on going. And I don't know. I think that just. I'm sure there are some people who are just genuinely psychopaths. A few people are coming to mind who I don't want to mention, who are just total cancel vultures, and they just get off on destroying people's lives in dirty ways. But I think these people have psychological problems. I don't think they're actually leaders on the left. And so I'm going to kind of not talk about those people. An honorable mention, though, for somebody who I really don't like is what is that guy's name? People are going to double take. what is that guy's name? Yoram Hazony. Okay, I mean, Yoram Hazony. This is sort of an interesting middle case. Okay, Yoram Hazony is a nationalist. He's an Israeli, and I very much appreciate that. And I very much appreciate the fact that he's being honest, and he's saying that what everyone can obviously see, that Israel is a nationalist country. And he's furthermore being very, very honest and full of candor in admitting that morally Gentiles should have the same right to aspire to that which Jews do. 100% agree. And so for that, he basically is a saint in my book, right? Because those admissions are so infrequently given that I feel almost like I have to, I don't feel like I have to. I feel like I should congratulate him for that. But the problem is that for Yoram Hazony, the way his career has played out, his support for European nationalism is 100% theoretical. So like, let's say you're a young Gentile guy who here is Yoram Hazony, and he buys the book and he buys the T-shirt and he signs on to national conservatism. And he decides to advocate for Christian nationalism in America, or German nationalism in Germany, or Russian nationalism in Russia, or English nationalism in England. And then, if he's in England, he has his bank account slashed, and he gets swatted, and he's unemployable. I mean, no one slashed Yoram Hazony's bank account. No one's coming after him. And so, like, I don't know, like, what has Laura Towler, for instance, who that happened to, what has she asked for that Yoram Hazony has not implicitly endorsed in theory? Short of some idea, short of some assertion that Laura Towler is a secret evil person, which there seems to be no evidence to support that. I don't doubt she said something spicy somewhere on the internet. But the problem is that there's no skin in the game for Hazony, and it's not his fault that there's no skin in the game. But he can endorse hypothetical Gentile nationalism until the cows come home. He doesn't meaningfully advance real Gentile nationalism in any meaningful way. And the best thing it can do, I'm glad there's going to be a Gentile nationalism department in Yeshiva University or in the University of Tel Aviv. That I kind of, and I applaud him as an intellectual, but this maybe is an admission of guilt for me. I get angry every time I read him because that reality is constantly in the back of my mind, and I don't know. So that is that's a problem with me for another person, I guess. I hope that answered the question, Hunter. Hunter counts for $5 USA. On the topic of Trump being blocked from taking office, how likely do you think they would be willing to go to the JFK route? What would the fallout be for a situation like that? I mean, the problem with the JFK situation is that it basically immortalizes Trump as a martyr, and the cathedral knows that. There's also it's very difficult to keep people quiet on the inside of assassination, a successful assassination plot, and furthermore, it destroys the left's narrative of the right being violent. In 1963, when the communist Lee Harvey Oswald shot Kennedy for being an anti-communist, the left wing had 100% control, or the moderate left wing had 100% control over the media. This was after World War II. It's really hard to imagine just what lockstep they had on the media. And so they were able to kind of float the idea that Lee Harvey Oswald was somehow an organic outgrowth of Texan right-wing culture and not himself a radical of the left. And this is, they can't do that anymore. If there's an assassination attempt or a successful one on Trump or DeSantis, these people will eternally be martyrs to the cause, and they will encourage more people to follow in their steps with better security. And any attempt to do that will immediately be a huge risk of exposing the cathedral's narrative for ridicule. Nervan V Maker for $10 USA. The right is big on telling people they need to read history. However, history communities are filled with bugmen who, despite reading dozens of books on U.S. Puritans or Christian Crusaders, don't think or act any differently than the average shitlib. They consume history as like normies consume Star Wars. Yeah, but there's always an easy out, right? Which is that if you consume history like normies consume Star Wars, it will forever be a consumer product, and so you'll forever be put to shame by people who internalize the lessons of history. Well, first of all, Nerve Ambient Maker, there's two problems that the history nerd, bugman, white, and really when we talk about white bugman, it's really it really is usually a white or Asian phenomenon, and this will happen to both of them. The first problem is that the diversicrats are coming for the history community in a big way. So if they're just repeating back historical facts in autistic ways that don't actually get internalized politically, then they're going to get canceled eventually, because there will need to be a wokeified alternative history, revisionist history, that gets rid of inconvenient facts from the narrative. So they've got that Scylla on one end, and on the other end, there's the Charybdis of the fact that a bugman who consumes history like it is a fandom product is just as cringe as a Star Wars fan, and he will be transparently that way in his life. And I'd like to think that if we stand up in the same room and one person has the ability to have gravitas and meaning and a direction in their life, that will be sexier than any person who's just autistically repeating facts back to an audience. And in the absence of any kind of external political entity that can veto those right-wing history appreciators from the scene, the right-wing history appreciators will always win politically. So the bugman history consumer, the bugman who consumes history like a fandom, is doomed for the same reason that the political moderate is doomed. And that is because his turf is being consumed on both sides. In the uncancelled space, the right-winger will always win. And on the cancelled, curated space, he will increasingly be curtailed, if not for his unorthodox political opinions, then because of his incorrect race, sex, or gender. It does not fulfill the diversity quotas or the ideological needs of the department or the online community he's working for. But thank you very much. That's a good one. Good question. I have to speed up because I'm running out of energy quickly. Sam53 for $5 USA. Evening, Dave. I'm being called into HR to talk about what I'm assuming is... I'm being called into HR, Human Resources, to talk about what I am assuming is tomfoolery. I may have unthinkingly committed in the company's social committee. I am the only one... I'm the only male on it. Are women incapable of addressing perceived problems directly without corporate muscle? Way to ruin a good work relationship or good work relationships. Well, yes, absolutely. And if you are called into HR, just ask questions, sound clueless, and if they ask, don't ever say something you don't believe is true. But if you can keep your job for an "I'm sorry I offended you" apology, just say "I'm sorry I offended you." I'm happy to not say anything or not do anything if it doesn't defend people. That does not, as long as it doesn't put words in my mouth, and that's my thing. There is this thing. This is sort of a scary dimension to our own decline, where women are increasingly ruling everything. There's no population that is more agreeable or more conformist than postmenopausal women. They'll go along with anything. And so the advantages that these ideological centers have as millennial women start reaching the end of their years, of their fertile years, is that they're about to have a very ideologically lockstep population that's not particularly interested in politics in any way that we would recognize it. Again, I think two things will happen. Women will take a step back because they don't want to be Dolores Umbridges who are ruining the corporations that they staff, and it's not exciting for them and they don't feel appreciated, or they'll just ruin the corporations that they work for. And I think in between those two effects, eventually some kind of work environment will be developed in order to keep whatever corporations we have running long enough to put food on the table, at least for enough people the people who can afford food on their table. But thank you very much. Spiffy for $3. Is your impression that Roe v. Wade decision will create more right-wing victories, or is it another grasp at straws by the right that will continue to empower the liberal beast? Well, to be honest, Spiffy, I think it's kind of neutral. I don't think that there's an easy way that the left can use this to create more victories for itself. I will echo Hunger the Dye Merchant, that is, because there's multiple people named Hunger. Hunger the Dye Merchant is right when he says, I was utterly underwhelmed by the activist pressure that was brought to bear in the wake of one of the biggest progressive defeats for 60 years. Whatever button they're pushing to energize their base, it's not working very well anymore, and it's not getting out people in large droves, and it's not making people feel good about themselves, which is at the end of the day what progressives want to feel. That being said, I mean, the Roe v. Wade in and of itself does not generate any victories for the right in any material way, because the right-wing activist structure is not designed for a post-Roe world. They don't. The necessary next step is to retool into crisis pregnancy centers inside blue areas to catechize people into a pro-life mindset. That is the next step, and to expand that purview in productive ways. Don't help with all child care. All child care can be helped for with these crisis pregnancy centers, which means maybe we can get government funding, right? And all this stuff. Like I know entryism has its own set of problems. I know they'll fight us tooth and nail, but that is the necessary next step to build a power base that the pro-life movement has, and to build an activist class inside the ruling class that respects that. And they've done a little bit in that dimension, but they haven't done very much. And so materially, I think that this is really just a wash. I think that the right wing, at least in the last few days, has come out on top optically. It's been transparently clear that the left is not as energized as it should be, and then its narratives about the improperness of this decision just do not play well and do not hold up to questioning on social media. So, so I would say there's some kind of minuscule benefit to the right in this, and the right needs to learn how to use these victories and not just obtain them. Beat Budapest for $5. Is going hard on the left in action, not just rhetoric, really that counterproductive? The American right has been remarkably docile for the last 50 years. It certainly hasn't held much territory. Why not push the Overton window and up the ante? Yes, so this is an easy question, Pete Budapest. The Overton window does not move because people make ostentatious, loud, and radical statements in public. The Overton window does not move from protests. It does not move from hands-on political activism. Those are flexes that the cathedral does after it's already consolidated the Overton window move inside university systems. The Overton window moves when an elite, or an elite that's worried about being replaced, changes its attitude towards something. There can be no Overton window shift without that. The Overton window shifts come from the universities, and then they're filtered down to these activist classes. And then the activist classes give young people the chance to have a fun weekend and flip off a police officer and shout their abortion to the heavens, and then feel like they're Che Guevara for doing so, with the full knowledge that they're 100% protected and that they'll never have professional consequences for any violent action they commit at those protests. But there's a mistake between cause and effect. The thing that shifted the Overton window right is that the left ran out of white people to convert. Though the Gamergate really was a step forward for the right, because every generation of white men tends to have a certain cohort of nerds that is more left than it is right. They're bitter about being bullied in school. They think that they can do better on the left. The left has some pet issue like pot that they appreciate. In Gamergate, that dynamic turned around, and it showed them that, hey, I know maybe even a majority of young white men might be against you. That created that forced the left to essentially shift the Overton window further to the left to obtain electoral victories, and it created sort of a shadow of the Overton window for the right. But you cannot move the Overton window on the right by shouting. The Overton window is moved through institutions. And those institutions that move the Overton window are not owned by the right. Those institutions are the unelected government, the media, the prestige media, and the certified academy higher education. But thank you very much for the super chat. I apologize for moving quickly because I am quickly running out of energy. Dashing Rogue for $5 USA. I'm convinced at this point that we are fighting a holy culture war. Well, I am too, but I'm afraid that we are, in some sense, probably losing a holy culture war. As that famous quote from North by Northwestern goes. But I agree. There's nothing more demonic than chaos when you see it unmasked. And there's been a lot of unmaskings that have gone on in the last 5 years in particular. So the Dashing Road continues. The war is between the spiritual right and the spiritual left, aka the left-hand path. The Satanists, for example, are weaponizing religious freedom to kill kids. Even Richard Spencer is one. Yeah, I mean, this is... Richard Spencer is essentially Rachel Maddow at this point, and this is... Richard Spencer is addicted to being edgy, and because the left no longer listens to him anymore, the only way that he can be edgy is to piss off right-wingers. And so, since 2018 in particular, Richard Spencer's political opinions have been exactly the same as Richard Maddow's political opinions. Unironically, he is a 100% orthodox progressive with some more racism shoved in. But as you might realize, this is the classic example of being penny wise, pound foolish. We have to cleave to truth in all actions and in all statements. Never abandon truth. Yeah, but I mean, there's Richard Hanania had this great quote today on Twitter where he was talking about there was another decision coming down about how this college coach had a right to personally pray on the field after a college football game. And all the leftists were bleating about separation of church and state. And at this point, the left was doing the typical thing to the right. Like, imagine if it were Muslims. Imagine if it were Muslims praying to Mecca after a football game. And I think, first of all, I mean, there were literally examples of this on the show. This misbegotten Canadian TV show called Little Mosque on the Prairie. Maybe I'm thinking of something else, but I'm pretty sure there was one like that on that Canadian TV show. But furthermore, I don't give a shit if Muslims want to pray to Mecca after a football game. I really don't. That's not my concern as a right winger. And we could argue about, what the religious composition of Western countries should look like religiously, and that's maybe a more complicated conversation. But Muslims who are already here and who are already citizens, praying is something that I actually think is refreshingly holy, given the kind of absolute demons we come into contact with on a daily basis, wheeled out by the Biden administration, who are just straight up absolutely demonic white people. Point well taken, Dashing Rogue. Hunter 2 for $3 USA. Okay, we'll have to quit the super chats, guys, because I am officially running out of energy. House in the countryside with land or a decent condo in the city. House in the countryside with land. That is in my opinion, depends on the city, obviously. If I were to fathom a guess, the price of the countryside land will go up significantly more than the condo in the city because we're going to move to an economy where almost everyone telecommutes. Therefore, the costs of living in the countryside are going to be massively reduced. And because of that, people live in the countryside. Absolutely. People think I'm against this, but, if you want to be an urban pioneer, which you should consider, you can undertake that. But understand that being an urban pioneer means that you are financially dollar for dollar going to be taking it. You're going to be taking one for the team a little bit because you will not make as much money, I believe, in the condo in the city than you will in the countryside in the house. That being said, I'm not a real estate agent, so take this with a grain of salt. Certainly, if you bought a condo in San Francisco, you'd be a millionaire, if you bought it in the 90s. Okay, but thank you very much. I hope that helps. The other reason why you want to buy a house in the countryside is that you can use it. And if this is your first home, you always want to buy something that you can use. Even in the event that it goes down significantly in terms of monetary value, you'll still be able to live in it. And typically real estate on the long enough time frame tends to be worth more than it is when you bought it, on average, right? Looking great. Okay, so Ori Samsonov again. Looking great, Dave. If you like dropping some pounds fast, check out Code Robinson's snake diet. You basically survive on water and salt for an extended period of time. It's surprisingly easy to stick to. Abort body fat, no babies. Not babies. Abort body fat, not babies. Well, I've got my PhD pregnancy here that I've been looking to abort for about 3 years now. It's embarrassing how much I've kept this weight on post my dissertation. But thank you very much, Ori. Ideally, I just go to a low carb diet that I could maintain through the year. But somehow low carb diets never survive. They never survive the Christmas holiday, and I find them even harder to take up during Lent. My family has to stop getting toddler colds every other week. That needs to be the first thing. Okay, Remy Copard. Is that like Remy Copard? For $7 USA, do you think you will see a balkanization of the U.S. in your lifetime? No. Not politically. I think there will be. I think that the federal government will functionally lose power, but it will not de jure lose power. The federal government will absolutely maintain the right to have a monopoly of force in all 50 states for my lifetime, I sincerely believe, mainly because the military has too much to lose. Think about this. Like, think if you're the Washington faction of a balkanizing U.S. population, and then you have like the Texas faction all of a sudden like start training up like hardcore right-wing tank divisions supported by an air force and tactical nukes. Like, what are you thinking in Washington? What are you thinking? Like, you either prepare for war, and a war that you could very much lose, or you're gonna be stuck there with 4 stars in your chest when the new American Texan Caesar rolls his howitzers across the Potomac and sticks your head on a pike, right? So the military cannot allow. There's too many diverse military assets, and the assets mean too much. It cannot concede possession over the military bases de jure, unless they're really, really stupid. Now, what might happen is they might de facto, they might functionally cede power to localities because they just can't actually competently do anything. And then slowly, we have sort of a Merovingian to Carolingian power transfer where the people who are managing these stockpiles of weapons, they're technically getting paid by Washington, but they're really getting paid in hard currency, by the local authorities. And so they become those people instead. And then that might be a way to eventually balkanize that, but that would take multiple generations, and this can't occur in I believe at this point that this cannot occur in my lifetime. What's going to occur in my lifetime is going to be the third worldization of the first world. And to the extent that we do not live in these things, our task is to create pockets of first world culture and resistance cells of first world political activity that can operate in isolation to this incompetent third world order that will inevitably take the reins both in South America and in North America. Maybe Europe can push back on this. I think urbanism might be an alternative. Classically, urbanist type parties haven't done well in Europe, but of course, if the American empire kind of loses its grip, who knows what will happen? Who knows? It's hard to really say. France might fall. I mean, it sounds like a long shot, but it could happen. France could get an Orbanist republic. What would it be, like the Seventh Republic at this stage? Okay. Aristocratic Owl for $10. USA. The great Supreme Court Judge Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. was the man to spearhead legal realist doctrine. What are your thoughts on how the current crop of conservative judges embraces this doctrine and how it will affect future decisions down to the line in the Supreme Court case? Well, you have me at a disadvantage, Aristocratic Owl. I'm not a legal scholar. I'm an engineer. I just know this. I just picked this up from being a fan. I understand Oliver Wendell Holmes was a great scholar in legal realism, but I can't tell you exactly how this is manifested in the work done by Alito or Thomas or Scalia or whatever. I take it that realism is just sort of meaning that you have to practically apply what the Constitution says in its apparent meaning and its literal text. Ultimately, I mean, to be quite honest, Aristocratic Owl, these shenanigans, I mean, the court might be able to get rid of another. The court might have one or two more sessions where it can just dish out these big body shots on the cathedral. But if it does another one of these legal drops where it's like, oh, hey, core legal institutions for how our unelected government functions, those are all going away tomorrow because legal theory, because logic. The powers that be will lose, and I'm convinced the powers that be, after again 2 more of these dumps, they'll try to pack the court, and they might succeed. Okay, great. Thank you very much, Aristocratic Owl. Okay, got double click that one, I guess. Okay. So Aristocratic Owl was asking me what my favorite Sir Edward Coke quote is. Can you read it, or at the end of the stream? Do you mean Sir Edmund Burke? Hold on. Let me type this into the Google engine. Okay, Sir Edward Coke. Sir Edward Coke. I'm going to be embarrassed if I... Okay, this is one of the... Oh, okay, this guy. I'm vaguely aware of this person. So this is a pre-English Civil War legal theorist that I believe he was critical to the development of English common law, and he obviously preceded the people like Cromwell, and he came after who was the Cromwell that was Henry's prime minister? Not John Cromwell, Thomas Cromwell. He came after Thomas Cromwell and before Oliver Cromwell, and he was one of these pioneers of English common law. I am afraid you have a disadvantage. I do not have a quote. If you put one in the chat, I'll read it out for you if you want. But this is not my... sometimes I feel people are trying to catch me in an era of something I don't know. It'd be fun if I could come up with some quotes. Here, maybe I can just Google it. Edward Coke quotes. Edward Coke from WikiQuote. Here it goes. Okay. A word must become a friend or you will not understand it. Perhaps you will do well to be cool and detached when you are seeking information. But I remind you of the wife who complained, when I asked John if he loves me, he thinks I'm asking for information. Okay, that's perfect. This is always a reminder, kids. It never hurts to look up a word that you're unsure of the definition of. When you're in high school, and you're a high school pedant like myself, you can get away with kind of guessing at the meaning of words. Like you can kind of guess that incorrectly that comprise means the same thing as constitute. It actually means kind of the inverse, although by common usage it's come to mean the same as constitute. And so you can use all these big words without ever looking them up because you can infer their meaning from context and you can sound smart and maybe attract girls. But this does not help you ultimately. what will ultimately help you is actually knowing what the word means, and that can only come from actually looking it up. So I encourage people to look up words again and again and again. I'm a little bit too tired to parse the thing about women's logic with words, but and there you go. He sounds like a very clever man. That sounds like a very modern quote for someone who comes from like the 17th century. Okay, Iron Duke 99 for $3 USA. Dave is a husband and father, and that makes him a good man. Well, I appreciate the sentiment, Iron Duke, and I do hold the fact that I'm a father to be one of my core pieces of identity at this stage. I was neither a husband or father when I started my channel. I got married and had a kid over the course of the years I've been doing this. Second of all, a lot of people who I don't like very much are husbands. Some of them are fathers. Maybe I should be more charitable, but thank you very much for the super chat, and I appreciate it. I think people, there needs to be, for a while back, left-wingers were calling us right-wingers the daddies because of Jordan Peterson. And there's always the daddies want this, the daddies want this. I'm like, this is so great. If anything, it would be great if the right-wingers could be known as the people who are the fathers. We are the people who have families, who have skin in the game, who will make decisions based on families, and who will responsibly set up government to reflect that. Okay, so chat from Glow in the Dark. Okay, here we go. Libertarianism is a social construct for high trust societies. Even then, when someone discovers the benefits of lying, it will fall apart. Also, reality isn't based on consent. It's based on force and the application of force. How and why you use force gives people dedication to a structure. Well, I mean, that truer words haven't been said. I can't really add to that, Glow in the Dark, but thank you very much for your contribution. I appreciate it. Hopefully I'm getting to the end of these super chats because I am getting very tired. Glow in the Dark for $3. Lawyers are still the worst moral arbiters in my experience, but they're not supposed to be moral arbiters. They're supposed to be linguists. They're supposed to be a lawyer should be a linguist and a logician. That should be what the lawyer is. And in contentious cases of criminal, I think there is a case that a lawyer can defend a client, as long as he doesn't lie, even if he suspects he might be guilty, under the idea that the adversary nature of the court will bring truth out, and as long as he doesn't leave out facts. But yeah, this is the problem, is that lawyers have become priests. They've become Brahmins, and they are a very, very corrupt Brahmin order. Lawyers are closer to linguists than they are to liturgists, than they are to lyric poets even. Okay, Saffron Park for $3 USA. Where is the concept of regime complete discussed? Google was no help. I would search Gray Mirror for regime complete. Regime complete is a play on AI complete or NP complete. So an NP complete is a fundamental concept of computer science. It means a problem that can be verified in a polynomial time, but cannot be solved in polynomial time. And NP complete problems are essential to our understanding of computer science security. This goes on to AI complete. AI complete problem is any problem that it would take a computer to basically mimic the entirety of human intelligence in order to be able to do this thing well. And then regime complete, from Yarvin, means you need to be able to clear them all out before you could make this policy change. There's no way you could convince the reigning government to embrace this policy change as a mechanism of reform. All right, cool. Great, I'm going to go on further. Glow in the Dark for $3. Bulwark Crowd. The Bulwark is a publication. I think it's kind of normicon. The Bulwark crowd thinks SCOTUS decision is radical. They are just Democrats with some economic understanding. Yes, they also acknowledge the left's moral positions. I mean, I don't know what to say, but this. So these are like the Carolyn Borisenko people, like the anti-woke moderates. These people are a joke. And recently, R.N. McIntyre had this sort of moderate left libertarian on his channel, and he was way too nice to this guy. He was way too nice. He was like, "Oh, do you believe this? Do you believe that? Well, it's good that you believe this, but these are my reservations." I might behave that way to an adversarial party if that party was communist or leftist, or someone who had a reasonable possibility of existing, of an ideology that has a reasonable probability of existing in 10 years. Moderate liberalism has the probability 0 of being a primary political force in this country anymore after the present day. Nobody young is going to believe this anymore. Nobody young and worthwhile is going to believe this anymore, and I don't feel like I should entertain people on these illusions. When you go to people and you try to convince them of something, you are signaling to them that they're worthwhile, and then you're listening to them, and that you're engaged in a dialectic. And sometimes you do that with enemies, because sometimes you can convince enemies, or more likely convince their audience. And I think that I took a very soft approach with Sargon of Akkad when we first debated in 2016, and I think that approach really paid off. I think he came to understand everything I was trying to put across, maybe a little bit more slowly, but still he learned all of the lessons, and he's now really much on board with what we're trying to say about good governments and its relationship to power. But then there's sort of the opposite end of this. There are the situations where what moderates need to internalize is that they're useless. They need to get it through their skulls that nobody cares about what you say, because everyone knows that anyone who says what you say is transparently lying to help one political side or the other come to power. You can't implement political power at the top level because you can't control political power with a moderate coalition. And increasingly, few young people want to be the trailing edge of a continuously progressive, leftist, radicalist, and transhumanist agenda. I don't have to entertain this. This is useless. You should be convincing me about why I should even be entertaining these ridiculous ideas to begin with. That's the framing, because they need to internalize their own uselessness before they can really start to question the intellectual validity of their positions at this stage. I think that, I don't know, I just think this needs to be an attitude that continuously goes on. Otherwise, we're going to be endlessly in these sort of hatchling games with the likes of PSA Sitch. PSA Sitch, he did this whole song and dance with Academic Agent, where he accuses Julius Evola of being anti-Semitic because Julius Evola wrote something about Jews, and then he corners Academic Agent into asking questions, like legitimate questions about group interest. And after he goes, "Oh, why do you believe this? Why do you believe that? Why do you believe this?" He kind of pulls the thread for thread after thread after thread. He like a typical hatchling, he turns around and says, "Oh man, Academic Agent, why are you so obsessed with the Jews? Oh my God, don't you have a psychological problem? I mean, you brought it up. You're the one who's taking this important thinker and reducing him to his opinion about like an ethnic group or something like that. This is ridiculous." But that's the kind of sort of dishonest tactic that you get from centrists. You have to get it because they understand that the dialectic progress, if it's allowed to innocently proceed, will reveal certain truths that will demonstrate that their business model for politics is an absolute sham, and that there's no reason to actually entertain this anymore. Okay, I mean, look. I want to have a big caveat here before, I know I'm really tired, but there's two kinds of moderates. There's the moderates who counter-signal the right, and then there's sort of the moderate fellow travelers. And the moderate fellow travelers, like, well, I dream of libertarianism. I dream of creating a society that's so high trust we could have the 1950s or the 1980s again. I dream of creating a society where religious notions are so implicit in everyone's actions and thoughts and words and culture that we can functionally exist with a de jure separation of church and state. Because we're just so strong. And, I understand that things might have to go on that are anti-liberal, but, this is just my moral conviction. That person is a friend. But people who are counter signaling you and playing holier than thou games because they're a little bit further to the left of you and they're not yet on the cancellation block. I mean, screw those people. Especially if you play games like Sitch, where he literally brags to Academic Agent, who has been canceled, that he hides behind an anonymous account where there's no opinion Sitch has that he can't shout from the rooftops. That's not honesty, Sitch. That's just you being a person who revels in their own lack of intellectual imagination and their own establishment privilege. But anyway, yes. Thank you very much, Alternative Avenues. Sorry, this is a new one. I apologize. Okay. Do you have an active reading habit? Any advice on the methods for reestablishing active reading habits? My active reading habit goes on and off. I try to keep a book on my nightstand. And I try to not do any screen time before bed. That is really easy because I don't like video games. My kind of shameful nerd hobby is of a more physical variety. So I'm not staring at a screen. But just create a little space for yourself every night where you can read a chapter or two. And reading groups. That's the other thing too. Get a book club together. If you have a deadline, you'll read the book. That's the only way I got through Aristotle and Plato. It was because there was deadlines for readings and I had to read it. Glow in the dark for $3 USA. I think what you mean with a mutant can be helpful in a person of unsound body is better than a person of unsound mind and a much better one. Okay, I think what you mean with a mutant can be helpful is that a person of unsound body is better than a person of unsound mind and much better body who also has unsound morals. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Because form, this is the fundamental, this is why you can't, I feel even dirty saying this. This is why, you can't abort black babies to save the white race. Those European ethno-nationalists think that you can do. It doesn't work that way. Because it's the fundamental mistake of the 20th century. And the fundamental mistake of the 20th century is that form preceded essence, but it's not essence precedes form. And no, for humans at least, we could argue over whether metaphysically it's the case, whether metaphysically the universe proceeded from some kind of Platonic ideal of itself, or whether the Platonic ideal is superimposed on it mathematically. But just for human existence, any immoral people will genetically degenerate, and any moral people, I believe, will genetically improve themselves. And I sincerely, I guess I don't have scientific evidence to prove this, but I'm saying this as a historian. We obviously can't say anything about biology because there's not enough evidence. But in terms of civilizational achievement, I feel very strongly that the morality of a society and the essence of a society is what creates the form output. And I think that is why it's so much more important to have a decision made to orient your life towards order and moral virtue than it is towards chaos from the perspective of a beautiful person. If anyone wants to watch a movie gem from the 1980s that I absolutely adore, I've only seen it once, but I really like this movie, watch David Lynch's The Elephant Man. A true story about a man named John Merrick who is hideously deformed based on some congenital birth defect. And yet he was one of the most poetic souls. He had this beautiful perspective on the world and was able to, and lived as a high Victorian gentleman, although he died fairly young. And he went from being sort of this circus freak to being this person who was actually a part of the Victorian scene of arts and letters. And it's really amazing. And that should be a reality where people beautiful people like ContraPoints, maybe beautiful at one point, like ContraPoints, are put below, people like John Merrick is a healthy society. And a society that does the worst, a society where dolled up people eternally make fun of incels, for genetic or cultural shortcomings that they had no hand on is a culture that has decided to extinguish itself culturally, and I believe also genetically. Yeah, but that, again, I can't substantiate that. That's just a theory. That's just a conjecture, so to speak. I believe that the human genetic pool is incredibly sensitive, but that may be true, it may be false, right? Nerve AMV Maker for $3 USA. Pro-abortion right-wingers are retards. Abortion rates don't even differ enough to affect demographics. That's driven solely by migration. They are cheering baby murder for literally nothing. Again, yeah, it's absolutely stupid. I don't know why this argument keeps on coming up again and again and again. It never can stand up to even 15 minutes of scrutiny. Not just from Christians, not just from moral objections, from any kind of just straight up Machiavellian power analysis. It fails. It's literally like the sin makes you stupid idea. Anyway, okay, coming down the line here, and I still need to read my psalm. This is in the question, so I need to click it twice. Sai Sarab for $3. In India, people largely marry into their family's caste. Could this be considered a form of conservative eugenics to preserve genetic traits that caste and community possesses? Well, I believe sincerely that what we are having in the Western society is a caste collapse. What happened was that Western societies have always been ruled by the Kshatriya or warrior caste, and they've always been kept in check by the Brahmin class or the priest class or the intellectual caste. Think of the classic conflict between Henry II and Thomas à Becket, and you'll see the same conflict between Thomas More and Henry VIII. And this is the same conflict between the Ghibellines and the Guelphs. The warriors rule, and they're sort of overseen by the priest class. And then sometime in the 19th and 20th century, specifically after World War II, the European countries just fired their warrior castes and decided to just have a completely Brahmin rulership class. And now, wouldn't you know it, without any controls on Brahmin excesses, the intellectual class is devouring itself demographically, politically, culturally, until nothing's going to be left of the society that it rules. Really, Syed Sarab, what you have here is a chicken and the egg problem. Caste will emerge from communities of spirituality. When communities first start out, they're sort of a primitive egalitarianism. Castes emerge organically from roles people fill across a very, very long time frame. And because of that, what I think needs to happen, what we have is a Brahmin caste collapse. What needs to replace them is a new set of priests and a new religious belief. I think which will have to be based on Christianity, and the people who seize that will create the new Western world order. This is a cataclysm of the same scale as the Reformation. But unfortunately, I think you're thinking about it a little bit backwards. We cannot use a pre-existing caste system to create boundaries. What has to emerge organically from right-wing communities is, look, in this community, you're going to generally not find feminist women. In this community, you're going to find men who aren't going to spin you like a plate. If you marry them, or if you start a relationship with them, you can be sure that they're not going to try to seduce you and get you into bed. And the men in the community will enforce this to the limited amount that they can. And that builds sort of a trust, right? And then inside of that, maybe new arrangements can occur. But I think that has to come after a sort of moral community is developed with more details. Tom Kelly with the super chats keep on coming. Tom Kelly for $3 USA. Give credit where credit's due. Mitch McConnell lifted the filibuster that allowed Trump's nominees in there. Well, okay, very much, Mitch McConnell. I give you credit where credit's due. Probably should comb my hair before I came on. I look kind of more crackpotty than I usually do. Yeah, my friends in high school always said that when I didn't shave, I looked like a Hasidic Jew, and when I did shave, I looked like the character Bob Dobbs from the Church of the Subgenius. You know, the 1950s dad with the pipe. You know, very very clean shaven. So yeah, I guess maybe I lose my Gentile nature when I don't shave. Yeah, I don't think it works that way. There are a few things that aren't shaved that might preclude me from that. But I said too much. You know I'm tired when I say that. Glow in the Dark for $3 USA. Sorry to add another super chat, but from my observations, bad moral decisions usually affect the next generation. More like an alcoholic mother harms the baby. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the sins of the father are absolutely... We will be dealing with this anti-white bullshit that the boomers hoisted up on us for the rest of our lives. Like, we haven't even begun to see the fallout from this anti-white stuff, because now anytime any ethno-nationalist from majority non-white communities wants to do something shitty to white people or to indigenous Europeans, they'll just be able to wheel out Ibrahim Kendi or Ta-Nehisi Coates, and that the justifications will leap off the page. They'll have to do less mental gymnastics to get to get from Ibrahim Kendi to we can just straight up murder and rob white people than the Warren Court had to get from the 4th and 14th Amendments to we have to make abortion a constitutional right. And they absolutely will do that. So we haven't even begun to see the fallout of these things. But that being said, thank you so much. I have to set down the super chats because I am very, very tired. Okay, so does anyone guess what the psalm I posted was in the original chat window was? I'll read it. It was in fact Psalm 89. And I don't have poetry. Oh, actually, I kind of do. So someone said that they wanted to have the Peas and they wanted to have Ezra Pound. So I found this in a used bookstore, the Peas and Cantos. And I remember Ezra Pound being a little more accessible to this. There is no way like this text scans. There's like Chinese characters in it. This is a meditation. I can't read this on camera. It will never work. It's not going to make good YouTube. Ironically enough, in the first Peas and Canto, it literally contains a reference of Emmett Till's father being hung for the rape and murder of Italian women, because while Ezra Pound was in an Italian jail cell for being a fascist sympathizer, he literally shared the cell with Emmett Till's father, apparently. And that's or at least, I mean, he references Till was hung for raping for raping a woman. So that's really interesting. If you're not an American, Emmett Till is a very, very famous case of lynching from the 1960s that I don't think was ever solved, and it is frequently dredged up as an example of how white people still lynch people, even though they happened, like, was it 60 years ago now? Anyway, Psalm 89. I will sing forever your love, Lord. Through all ages my mouth will proclaim your truth. Of this I am sure, that your love lasts forever, that your truth is finally established as the heaven. With my chosen one I have made a covenant. I have sworn to David, my servant, I will establish your dynasty forever, and set your throne throughout all ages. The heavens proclaim your wonders, O Lord. The assembly of your holy ones proclaim your truth. For who in the skies can compare with the Lord, or who is like the Lord among the sons of God? A God to be feared in the council of the holy ones, a great and dreadful to all around him. O Lord, God of hosts, who is your equal? You are mighty, O Lord, and truth is your garment. It is you who rule the sea in its pride. It is you who still the surging of its waves. It is you who trod Rahab under your foot like a curse, scattering your foes with your mighty arm. The heavens are yours. The world is yours. It is you who founded the earth and all it holds. It is you who created north and south. Tabor and Hermon shout with joy at your name. Yours is a mighty arm, O Lord. Your hand is strong. Your right hand is ready. Justice and right are the pillars of your throne. Love and truth walk in your presence. Happy the people who acclaim such a king, who walk, O Lord, in the light of your face, who find their joy every day in your name, who make your justice the source of their bliss. For you, O Lord, are the glory of their strength. By your favor it is that our might is exalted. For our ruler is in the keeping of the Lord. Our king is in the keeping of the Holy One of Israel. Of old you spoke in vision. To your friends, the prophets, you said, I have set the crown on a warrior. I have exalted one chosen from the people. I have found David my servant, and with holy oil anointed him. My hand shall always be with him, and my arm shall make him strong. The enemy shall never unwit him, nor the evil man oppress him. I will beat down his foes before him, and smite those who hate me. My truth and my love shall be with him. My name, his might, shall be exalted. I will stretch out his hand to the sea, and his right hand as far as the river. Oh my God, it's still going on? This is the longest one in the entire book. He will say to me, You are my Father, my God, the rock who saves me, and I will make him my firstborn, the highest of kings of the earth. I will keep my love for him always. With him my covenant shall last. I will establish his dynasty forever, make his throne endure as the heavens. If his son forsakes my law and refuses to walk as I decree, and if ever they violate my statutes, refusing to keep my commands, then I will punish their offenses with the rod. Then I will scourge them on account of their guilt. But I will never take back my love. My truth will never fail. I will never violate my covenant, nor go back on the word that I have spoken. Once for all I have sworn by my holiness, I will never lie to David. His dynasty shall last forever. In my sight his throne is like the sun. Like the moon it shall endure forever, a faithful witness in the skies. And yet you have spurned, rejected, your anger, and yet you have spurned, rejected. You are angry with the ones you have anointed. You have broken your covenant with your servant, and dishonored his crown in the dust. You have broken down all his walls, and reduced his fortress to ruin. And he is despoiled by all who pass by. He has become the taunt of his neighbors. You have exalted the right hand of his foes. You have made all his enemies rejoice. You have made his sword give way. You have not upheld him in battle. You have brought his glory to an end. You have hurled his throne to the ground. You have cut short the years of his youth. You have heaped disgrace upon him. How long, O Lord, will you hide yourself forever? How long will your anger burn like a fire? Remember, Lord, the shortness of my life, and how frail you have made the sons of men. What men can live and never see death? Who can save himself from the grasps of the grave? Where are your mercies of the past, O Lord, which you have sworn in your faithfulness to the sons of David? Remember, Lord, how your servant is taunted, how I have to bear the insults of the people. Thus your enemies taunt me, O Lord, mocking your anointed at every step. Blessed be the Lord forever. Amen. Amen. And this kind of speaks for itself. You see the cycle of civilizations, the interplay between the Brahmin king and the covenant kept by the Brahmins and the priests and the mandate of heaven, and then how that falls away. So guys, with that, I am very tired, and I think I've gone over time. So I'll wish you guys a happy Tuesday, and I'll see you next week.